South Africa, from SEFC. As usual, we will start with Eskom. If I may perhaps then see Ms. Totalemaje. I think she's the one that's presenting. You're welcome, madam.
Thank you.
I assume you're going to be the only one presenting?
No, Chair. There will be another colleague of mine that will be taking over the latter part of the presentation.
All right. We will swear him in just before he does his part. Correct?
Sure. Yes, okay. That's...
Okay. Thank you, madam. As you know, we start the presentations by considering the issue of oath or affirmation. Do you have an objection to taking an oath?
No, sir.
Thank you. With that, please raise your right hand and affirm the following. Do you solemnly declare that the information or the evidence you are going to give to this panel is the truth and the whole truth?
I do.
Thank you. For the record, please state your name, the organization you are representing, and your designation therein, please.
My name is Harsha Totlali-Maje. I'm the General Manager for Regulation at Eskom.
Thank you, madam. As you would know, you have 40 minutes, and your well, it includes it will then include the presentation by your fellow presenter, and your 40 minutes will then start now. You can proceed. At this stage,
trying to get my presentation up.
Okay, thanks. At this stage, we can just see your. I think it's your computer, but not the presentation as yet.
Okay, Chair, is my presentation coming up?
Yes, we can clearly see it now. Thank you. You can then proceed, madam. Thank you.
I'm just trying to get, okay, there we go. We're on presentation mode. Thank you, Chair, for giving us the opportunity to share this particular presentation. If I go to the next slide, it will direct us to what it is that we are going to be focusing on. We do try to focus on different things for the benefit of the stakeholders that are present, as well as for NERSA. So what we, in the first two aspects, is what I will deal with, and that will briefly look at the legislative framework that, that is necessary, and as we've learned, that it is a key part of the way that these revenue applications are made. And then secondly, we will focus a little bit on the legislative timeframes and the interdependencies, because this is something that we went through in this particular one, and we just want to project forward as far what the process would be as far as that is concerned. And then I would end there. As you would be happy to note, we go on to more exciting aspects. We'll get Dr. Ulrich Minna, who is also in a more exciting place in Cape Town, and therefore he will download, or he will share by himself, and I'm in boring Joburg, so that is a bit of a difficulty. And then he will deal with how Eskom's tariffs are positioned and indicate that Eskom's tariffs are positioned at lower than most other countries in the developed and in the developing world, and it applies to most of the categories, or all the categories as well. And then he will also share an independent study, or the outcome, or the highlights rather, of an independent study undertaken recently that provides a reliable and accurate estimates of the economic cost of load shedding, because that is a topical matter, and it is for the period of between 2007 and 2019. And both of these aspects, the latter two aspects, have been included in our submission document. And specifically on the fourth point, the whole study has been made available to all stakeholders through the cost of unserved energy consultation process that happened, I think it was submitted, or coincidentally also on the 2nd of June last year to NERSA. And so that document as a whole is also available on NERSA website, to my knowledge. So it's nothing new, but it is also included in our submission document because it is something that impacts the revenue as well. If we get into now the first topic, which is looking at the overall legislative framework, we have highlighted, as NERSA has done, certain tariff principles, and we are trying to understand how NERSA actually ensures implementation, and this is our interpretation. As far as the first tariff principle is concerned on the left-hand side, and then it will be to the corresponding aspect on the right-hand side of this table. The first one being that the tariff principle about enabling an efficient licensee to recover the full cost of its license activity, including a reasonable margin of return. And we feel that implementing the allowable revenue formula to guide licensees and NERSA itself in making this determination is the way that is basically lived upon and made alive so that it can really happen. And then as far as giving end users proper information, again, licensees undertake cost of supply studies in accordance with the NERSA cost of supply framework. And we understand it is all licensees, not only Eskom, especially the municipalities, that allow this proper information to be made accessible. That is the framework that is available at the moment. And as far as avoiding undue discrimination, again, where NERSA transparently makes determinations where crop subsidies and negotiated pricing agreements are approved. And the last principle that we've highlighted is the licensee may not charge a customer any other tariff. And that is a very important one because and that is the reason why we are completely dependent on NERSA making decisions. And obviously, it is incumbent upon all licensees to make timeous applications for revenue or price determinations. And obviously, over here, we are focusing on the ERA principles that are applicable mainly to Eskom, but it will apply to other licensees as well. If we look at the requirements, sorry about that. If we look at the key legislative requirements, where we focus on the requirements prior to Eskom making a revenue application, I think it's important for stakeholders to understand the complexity and the various, especially the legislative requirements that are necessary to show, and we'll get into the timing aspects as well. So the first part is the GSFA, which is the Government Support Framework Agreement, which is the first step or one of the first legislative requirements that we have to undertake, where Eskom is required to get a collective approval from the Department of Mineral Resources and Energy, Department of Public Enterprises, and National Treasury for any of the Section 34 independent power producer purchases that it would make. And then this would then feed into our production planning process. So that is why it is one of the initial steps that need to be looked at, because it is the timing that it would be required before the actual planning in our production planning process can start. Because we have to get an understanding of what it is that the government departments require to get approved. And I really need to point, and maybe the word consultation is actually not absolutely correct, because it is an approval process, and this takes approximately 2 to 3 months to undertake. And that is, we have to give we sort of borrow from the Municipal Finance Management Act as to how much of time, and we do give them 40 calendar days to provide us a response to what has been proposed. And there are sometimes some iterations, so that is why additional time is allocated to that. Then we take account of the comments from, then it is the MFMA process, which is basically once Eskom has developed its draft application, it would submit in terms of the MFMA to both National Treasury and SELGA, which is the South African Local Government Association, on a draft revenue application. And this is a consultation process, so the entities are allowed to make comments, and Eskom will consider them, and therefore it is a pure consultation process. And again, because of the 40-day stipulated time in the legislative requirements, we do budget 2 or 3 months for that as well, because sometimes we would go and provide more detail if required. So that would be, and we do provide a draft to NERSA when this is submitted, so that NERSA is alerted to that as well. Then we have to look at the MIRTA, which is the minimum information required for tariff applications. These are the templates which are linked to the MYPD methodology that provides detailed information for NERSA analysis. Again, this has been consulted on and has been approved. And just to point out that if there are going to be changes, we envisage that it would be at least 9 to 12 months prior to an application being made that this MIRTA, if it being revised, will be able to be used. And that would mean, obviously, because there would need to be preparation made internally to make sure that systems, etc., are up to speed to be able to fit into the MIRTA requirements. And then we come to the crux of the matter, which in this instance is the MYPD, which is the multi-year price determination methodology. Again, if NERSA, NERSA has before and will continue to make changes after the relevant consultation processes are undertaken. And again, our estimate is we require a final methodology for a minimum of 9 to 12 months prior to the submission. And basically it's the preparation to the submission to NERSA. So obviously it needs to be finalized at that time so that Eskom can again prepare. And again, if there are going to be significant changes, then there needs to be proper understanding of that. And maybe that's why we refer to a minimum period. So we also like to iterate our understanding of what the High Court has pronounced, in that when a new methodology is replaced, then only will this methodology that is published in 2016 not be valid any longer. And just to, I'm sure stakeholders are aware, but the present MYPD methodology defines the NERSA allowable revenue requirements for efficient costs, including the cost of capital. And I think, again, something that maybe stakeholders are not aware of is that there are certain long lead activities that need to happen even prior to us starting this legislative consultation and approval process. And those 2 examples of those that come to mind is the research consultation workshop. That is a specific requirement in terms of the MYPD, and the RAV valuation process, which is the regulatory asset-based valuation. These are all long-term processes, and they have to be done at a particular time prior to Eskom making an application. So obviously, if there is not enough time, it would be very difficult to make sure that these long lead items are actually, or activities are actually undertaken. And then once an application is being prepared, the prudency assessments framework will assist in guiding the application and making sure that various criteria are considered. And some of them include that, a reasonable person test would be done, and a decision would not be made on the outcome, but on when a decision was made, and then where committed costs are recognized. So there's a differentiation between forecasting and committed costs. And then I think an important one is that hindsight cannot be considered as a prudency kind of a criteria. And then in addition to these very specific ones that look at a revenue application, there are other legislative and regulatory requirements. And this includes something that's very topical at the moment, which is the environmental legislative requirements, and a myriad of other legislative requirements that any entity, including a public entity, would have to be cognizant of and include whenever such a revenue application is made. And specifically also, it would be the license and the grid code requirements, which are more specific to NERSA. And so this was the part prior to Eskom submitting its application. And once Eskom has submitted its application, our understanding is that NERSA will look at the MIRTA, which is a minimum information requirement for tariff application, and it would confirm within 2 weeks whether Eskom is compliant to the methodology, to the MYPD methodology requirements, and is guided by the MIRTA requirements. And then in terms of the Access to Information Act, Promotion of Access to Information Act, NERSA will confirm the confidentiality aspects with Eskom, and then NERSA will undertake its analysis, again in accordance with the regulatory rules, license conditions, MIRTA, MYPD methodology, etc. And then as this process is happening, there will be the consultation processes in terms of PAJA, as well as the NERA, which is the National Energy Regulator Act, and the Promotion of Administrative Justice Act. And then when NERSA makes its decision, it will be based on the Electricity Regulation Act, the MYPD methodology, and it would provide reasons for its decision in terms of PAJA. And then in terms of its EarthStar methodology, which is the Eskom retail tariff and structural adjustment methodology, as well as the cost to serve framework, it would allocate the allowable revenue to the various tariff categories. And again, we warn that if there are going to be changes, it would be best that this happens 9 to 12 months prior to implementation to allow for the necessary developments that might be required. And then obviously this is something that's not directly linked to Eskom, but it has a dependency, and therefore we mention it, is that we understand that NERSA has its municipal benchmarking methodology, where NERSA provides benchmarking guidelines for municipalities to make their price adjustments. And then the last point that is very important on the slide is that the MFMA, again, where the DPE minister has to timelessly table the approved adjusted tariffs by the 15th of March each year, so that they can be implemented to municipal customers from the 1st of July each year. This is a long snake, and so what I'm going to do is highlight specific aspects of it. But basically, this is looking at this particular application for financial year 2023, as far as what are the sequence of events. The legislation that we referred to basically guides many of the sequences of these events. But I think the most important point was that if we were going to have a new methodology, a revised methodology, it needed to have finalized as an optimal time by December 2019. But obviously the actual was already finalized, again, this was something that was hindsight. And then after that, they would be where Eskom starts to prepare, as I've mentioned. And I think if we just go along the snake, a lot of that people can look at their own leisure, but it is basically looks at the various Eskom processes. But when we come to the green one on the second line on the left-hand side is where there was a slight disjuncture between what was the optimal timing and the actual timing. And again, that is when Eskom had submitted and expected the start of the whole analysis process in June, but it only started in December. And I think coming to the end, the important point is that there would be actually at least a 2-year requirement for the finalization for a methodology prior to implementation of that particular methodology, and for the implementation of the tariffs. If we go to the next slide, my slide is not moving. Okay. We just want to now focus on what we've highlighted the various legislative requirements, but if we look at what the ERA, the MFMA, and NERSA and other process requirements for a subsequent decision is, it is expected that Eskom, municipalities, NERSA, and other licensees will have collectively learned from the experience of the financial year 2023 determination, the one that we are undertaking at the moment. And it has been established that the relevant methodologies need to be finalized timeously. And if there is going to be a new methodology, there needs to be time for the understanding of this methodology, and they would need Eskom and other licensees that would be required to comply with this may require additional time to be able to understand what the requirements are, and then there would need to be provision made for the preparation and the required consultations, as mentioned, as well as the governance approvals, and they would have to be, enough time made for a thorough, robust process as well. And then again, sorry, I think there's some disturbance. Okay, and then again, I think the consideration needs to be given to the implementation of any systems, as well as any proper infrastructure requirements that might be required. Now, I think the key point that we want to make is at the bottom of the slide, where, as experienced when processing this application, we want to highlight that there would be similar timing required to be made for the subsequent one. And I think our submission is that we are already too late for that, and that, in our opinion, will not be able to happen if all the legislative requirements are to be met. If we go to this slide, I know I'm running out of time now, but again, we can look at this in your own time, but again, this is looking for in the subsequent applications, is that if we start even in January right now and have a methodology finalized by August, and I'd like to point out that it would not only be an MYPD methodology or whatever else it might be called, it also applies to the MIRTA, to the EarthStar, to the cost to serve framework, to the regulatory reporting manuals, and any other related methodologies. Now, this is very important because all of these methodologies are interlinked. Something like the MIRTA has basically managed to stand this, be applicable for various developments of the MYPD methodology. But if there are going to be changes, then they would have to be consideration of that as well. But again, it points to a 9-month period for what Eskom has to prepare. And this will also apply to other licensees, including our understanding is municipalities, IPPs, etc. And therefore, they will be that particular time required, and then possibly a 6-month period for NERSA to make its decision. And then the point that we want to point out is that the earliest that a revised methodology could be implemented is financial year 2026 if NERSA wants to meet the MFMA requirements to allow for municipal budgeting. That means a decision needs to be made in the prior December. But if that is not going to be met, then it could possibly meet the 2025 timeframe. Okay, I think I'm going to end there, Chair, and my colleague will take over, Mr. Dr. Ulrich Mina. Thank you. I think he is on the line.
You're muted, Chair.
Yes, I'm ready. Not sure what's happening now with my mic. Okay, am I audible now?
Yes,
I'm audible now, I hope. Okay, thank you. I'm having trouble with my mic for some reason now on this system. We'd like to welcome you, Mr. or Dr. Mina. If you've got about 19 minutes left, would you object to taking an oath or an affirmation? Okay, in that case, kindly raise your right hand and affirm the following. Do you solemnly declare that the information and the evidence you are going to give to this panel is the truth and the whole truth as far as you know?
I do.
For the record, please state your name, your organization, and your designation therein, please.
I'm Dr. Ulrich Minnaar. I represent Eskom's Research, Testing and Development section, and I'm the middle manager of the Distribution Solutions Center of Excellence.
All right, thank you. As indicated, you have the remainder of the 40 minutes. If you can then just continue, please, with the presentation. If you don't mind, I'm actually going to possibly leave my mic on. I'm hoping it's not going to interfere with your presentation. I'm struggling with your mic with the mic at the moment. Thank you. Please continue.
No problem, Chair. The first part of my presentation will look at putting Eskom's tariffs in perspective of international tariffs, and this is largely done on a US cents per kilowatt hour basis, so that all the countries' tariffs are sort of on the same scale. And slide doesn't seem to be moving on. Okay, so in terms of external work done, in terms of a study that was conducted by Lazard in 2018 as part of an exercise at Eskom, they benchmarked Eskom against the average tariff against a range of countries. And what we can see on the slide is that we're significantly lower than many countries or at the same level. And Lazard made two comments in terms of the study that they did. The first of which was to state that Eskom's tariffs are not cost reflective and that the tariffs are low by international standards. And we're talking about Eskom in particular, and we're not talking about the municipalities here. In terms of cost reflectivity, I think a point to be made as we go through the presentation is that a low tariff does not necessarily mean that that country's tariffs are cost reflective. Many countries, they'll have low tariffs and the tariffs will then not be cost reflective, but then there are other challenges that result due to that non-cost reflective tariff. Moving on, if we look at our tariffs in terms of a sample set of international countries, and we've got some European countries as well as BRICS countries on this data set, and it goes from 2009 to 2019, which is the last reasonably available data set, we'll see that South Africa's tariffs are generally the lowest amongst those, besides for something like Russia, where there are subsidies due to their fossil fuel resources that they have available that they produce. So generally over the last decade, we've maintained low tariffs, and this includes the period from 2006 to about 2010, where there were some steep price in rand-based terms, there were some steep price increases. Even with those, over the time period, we have maintained low prices. This particular data set looks at small and medium industrial customers, and what's included here is Eskom tariffs in blue on the side, and as well as across the various provinces across China. And commonly people will refer to China as having low energy prices. But what we can see on this set is, and what has been done in terms of this comparison, is that I've included Eskom, I've included the provincial tariffs in China, as well as some of our municipalities. And what we can draw from this is that Eskom's tariffs in general are competitive or low, and the same could be said for some of our larger municipalities. But there are other municipalities where the tariffs are significantly higher than what we would find in China for your small and medium industrial customers. And we're typically talking customers with smaller than 1 MVA supply here. In terms of domestic prices, again, blue line refers to the average price, which is about 20 US cents per kilowatt hour for this. And this is a OECD data set maintained by the International Energy Agency. And on this data set, Eskom's domestic prices are significantly lower than the comparative data set. And if we broaden that to a broader data set and look back in history, the same sort of picture emerges for these household prices. This data set.
Apologies, Doc. Can I then just request? It seems to be people who've got their microphones on. Kindly switch them off because they're actually disturbing. We are really requesting. We can actually hear you in the background. Can I get assistance from IT, please, to switch them off? Thank you. Proceed, Doc. Yes, please.
Thank you. All right. So this, admittedly messy graph provides the same picture. The blue line with the diamond indicators on is Eskom's household prices relative to the OECD prices over that 10-year window. And consistently, Eskom, and particularly Eskom tariffs, have been amongst the lowest, if not the lowest, across that time window. This data I've then combined with data from Bloomberg, and what we then have here is a mapped data set where the brighter the color or the redder the color graph gets, the higher the tariffs are, and the deeper the blue, the lower the tariffs are. So what is indicative across this data set is that there's a wide range of prices worldwide, and this particular map looks at residential prices, with the highest prices typically occurring in Europe, and then both North and South America typically having higher prices for residential customers. Within Africa, I think we fairly typical, some higher, some lower. Again, the point of cost reflectivity needs to be made, and I will come back to comparative prices as well. But again, an indicator that for the available data across the world, our prices are competitive, if not amongst the lowest. When we look at industrial prices, we find a similar picture emerges where we do price very low in terms of what's being paid in other countries. Even many of the counterparts in Africa have significantly higher prices for electricity for the industrial customers, and not also counting the fact that in many African countries they are dependent on self-generation and diesel generators due to poor reliability in those countries. So even in those cases, our prices are still competitive. Taking a slightly different perspective of this, what is on this graph is residential prices. The higher up you are, the higher your residential price. The further to the right, the higher the price goes. The size of the circles indicate the GDP per capita of the countries, and then they colored according to the region of the world that they occur in. And what we can see when we look at this graph is that South Africa tends to be at or near the bottom, both for residential and industrial prices. The countries that have residential and industrial prices in this corner below us, and in both of those terms, are countries that mainly occur in the Middle East and Central Asia, where there's a lot of oil or natural gas, and they are heavily subsidized. In terms of the other countries, and in terms of our residential prices, and again, this is Eskom's residential prices and not municipalities, there are a number of countries whose prices are comparative or even better, but the trade-off that happens is that where you have lower residential prices, the industrial prices are significantly higher. So that is then speaks to, I guess, the policy or philosophy that the countries follow in terms of how they price electricity for the various sectors. Your wealthier European countries and all of that tend to sit up here, and they tend to have significantly higher prices for both residential and industrial customers. So this sort of just gives a broad perspective on where Eskom's tariffs in particular sit relative to the international market. The second aspect that I'm going to speak to right now is the cost of load shedding. And on this, Nova Economics was commissioned to conduct a study. They conducted an econometric analysis looking at the historical relationship between load shedding and GDP. And so then we now have estimate, having looked back at the load shedding that to the economy and the various sectors of the economy. So this will include your direct and indirect damages, as that is all picked up in the GDP data. In terms of the key results and findings that came out of the study, there were three major periods that the study looked at: 2007-8, 2013-15, and 2018-2019. And over that period, on the top blue graphs, what we have here is the cost of load shedding for that period in terms of rands per kilowatt hour, and it escalated from 7.60 Rand to approximately 9.53 Rand per kilowatt hour. And then on the bottom side of the graph, it's then indicated the economic damage in terms of billions of rands. So 6.6 for the first period, 15 billion, and then almost 13 billion for 2018-2019. So that was over that period. An aspect that came out of the study, if we look at the impact on GDP growth per sector, what's abundantly clear is that there's an uneven impact across economic sectors, with your agricultural sector taking the brunt of the impact and having their, for the 2018-19 period, having their economic growth reduced by almost 5%. And then following up on that, the utilities and the manufacturing sectors were the next hardest hit. Certain sectors such as the financial sector and personal services sector saw minimum impact in terms of their economic growth. So there's an uneven distribution of impacts of load shedding across sectors, and that has to do with the nature of the sector, as well as sort of the flexibility and resilience that there is in a sector, with sectors that have high energy inputs and continuous inputs being affected the most. In terms of actual rand value damage done by load shedding, the manufacturing sector took the most of the brunt, with that being in that period being 5.1 billion rand in 2020 prices, followed by transport. And inside the transport sector, according to the way it's set up, you include sort of telecommunications in there, followed by retail. In terms of the amount of load shedding that we have seen over the last 14 years, 2021 did see the most load shedding at 1,773 gigawatt hours for the year, and this we have to put into the perspective of the 200 terawatt hours produced annually and forecast going forward. And then in terms of the economic damage over the period, again, 2021 would have had the most significant impact due to the higher load shedding volumes, looking at 18 billion. And since in 2020 rand values, if we go back over the period, we're looking at 67 billion rand impact on the South African economy over these 14 years that load shedding has sporadically occurred. In terms of the economic impact on a daily basis, we're looking at, for stage 1, something like 235 million rand through to 942 for stage 4, and this is done on the basis of a full 24 hours of load shedding. So that gives you a high-level estimate of what the impact of load shedding is as a result of the study. Chair, I am going to end the presentation there and hand over to yourself for questions.
Thank you very much, Dr. Minnaar, and also like to also thank your co-presenter, Madam Totalemaje. We will then engage with your presentation. I guess it is the 4th in the series, and we will hopefully be seeing a trend, the link between the presentation you've made today with the other 3 presentations that you've made from Monday. But I'd like to then open up the questions to, I guess today I only have one of my colleagues who would be able to ask questions. Mr. Mkhize, if you can maybe start, sir. I do have a couple of my own. If you can start, sir.
Thank you very much, Chairperson, and thanks to the presenters. Let me switch off my video for just not to clog the system. Firstly, I would let me start from the end. Let me start from the end. The presentation by Dr. Minnaar. Just to please, if you can just categorically state the cost of load shedding being factored into the application, just to categorically state that. And then secondly, you do talk to the 1,773 gigawatt hours of load shedding in 2021 being the highest. But in your application, due to the low load, utilization, sorry, the low plant availability, which is the EAF of 62%. you're talking of a high utilization, and high utilization, in my understanding, will then result in need to maintain these increased maintenance cost. Ultimately, aren't we just going round and round in circles, because you gave the reason of maintenance for the high load shedding that was experienced? If you can just please clarify that in my mind as to, are we really getting out of the rut, or what is happening is that we are digging our own grave deeper and deeper? If you can just help with that. And then the second thing is, with regard to the cost of load shedding, shouldn't there be a penalty to discourage load shedding? That penalty being imposed to the supplier over and above factoring in the quantitative cost of load shedding. Because I believe that you do the mathematics, and then after doing the mathematics, you then have got to apply some judgment. So this is now with regard to judgment that needs to be fairly applied in that regard. I would like to understand that. All right. And then when it comes to the prices that are being compared, I think it's going to be important if you clarify the years that you refer to, especially the one that is a graph of Eskom's tariffs when you compare with those of China. Also, have this been discounted for in terms of living standards and other factors? No, because it can be very misleading to simply compare one country with another, not taking into cognizance also the resources being used to generate that energy source. I would say that at some stage, South Africa prided itself as having low prices of electricity, and therefore using that as a comparative advantage. So it's to then go back and say what went wrong. Hence, then the comparison with other countries is good. But I think that we also need to compare Eskom now with Eskom then, and be able to say what went wrong. All right. When it comes to the presentation by Madam Tsotlalimaje, on slide 4, although I understand you're talking of frameworks, you seem to be putting this prudence assessment as being dependent and linked to the MYPD application. And I look at it as something that can be done independent of the process of MYPD applications, and then be incorporated in them. So I'm still not so clear as to when you intend to do a prudency assessment, particularly when one looks at new build, then followed up by other plans, and prudency on a variety of processes within Eskom, taking due cognizance of our prudence assessment guidelines. So I will still need just to indicate when you intend to do that. And then I'm also of the view that the engagement with the energy regulator with regard to the timing that you explained very well, it will assist in terms of a technical engagement, where maybe we need to look at how the timing can be optimized, and how one can look at amending key aspects of the MYPD methodology, and maybe the electricity pricing policy, without necessarily doing wholesale changes, but tackling the issues that are of key concern, that then will be able to get the process moving faster. So is to say there's a need for an optimized process, and please consider looking at that through engagements with your regulator as well as the shareholder. being DPE as well as the other government departments that will be involved. I will leave it at that, Chairperson. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Mkhize. Again, I'm assuming that we have not been joined. I know Mr. Sibanda and Madam Aseti did excuse themselves, but I cannot just assume that Madam Pongos is not available. But I'm assuming that we are the only two members of the electricity subcommittee available today.
That is correct, Mr. President.
All right, no, thank you. Okay, I do have a couple of questions, maybe more than a couple. And I'll also do the same and actually start from the end. From the presentation in terms of the cost of load shedding. Maybe I'll pose the question like this, Dr. Mina. What is your message first in terms of those slides? You have a figure there, for instance, at the end of 953 for the 2018-2019 period in terms of cost of load shedding. Are you saying, and I'm just trying to understand what your message is, are you saying that you could, in fact, because the cost of load shedding is to the tune of 953 per kilowatt hour, are you implying perhaps that you could, as long as you are charging a tariff that's lower than 953 per kilowatt hour, is that tariff is worth charging? Is that what the meaning of this slide is? If it is so, does it take into account that at 953 per kilowatt hour, you're probably not going to have much agriculture because it would erode any of the competitiveness of the irrigated agriculture in terms of those, at least in the primary sectors, which, as indicated yesterday, the role played by electricity is in the order of between 10 and 20% of the total production costs. So you'll probably not have the primary sector. That is, you're probably not going to get grapes. So you'll probably still, perhaps, based on imported grapes or something, maybe still make wines, I don't know, etc., and any of the other downstream activities. But I guess I'm just trying to understand. What is the implication? What is that slide telling us? That is the first point. Now, I want to go back to your comparative slides and just ask the question that says, in your slides, for instance, that compares, all of them, that compares, I guess I can start with the first one, where we are comparing, I think it's slide 10 of 27, where we are comparing prices of selected countries, as you call them. The question I ask is that those prices that we are comparing there, are they including or excluding taxes that may be imposed by the different countries? Is that, when you're comparing the cost of production, which is what Eskom, I would assume that when we put in South Africa there, you are saying that is that's the Eskom wholesale price, I would assume, which would be basically the cost of production. When you're putting those prices in that graph, do you know if Lazard actually removed the taxes or not? I mean, I'm just going to give you an example. For instance, in terms of fuel, as you would know, everybody reports and says the South African fuel prices, petroleum prices, are higher than that of our neighbors, Botswana, in particular Botswana, Swaziland, and other. But those countries are actually supplied from South Africa. But you know the difference between the two is essentially taxes. It's the extent to which those countries tax liquid fuels. The question is therefore, when we are doing a comparison, should you not strip out the taxes first and any other local government charges, and therefore answer the question that in my mind, if somebody were to ask you, are we comparing apples with apples here? Or are we comparing apples with oranges? So that is my first question in respect of your presentation, Dr. Mina. The other question relating to you, maybe if I can ask, do you believe that there is a link between the cost of electricity and the level of industrialization in any country? Do you believe that in any of the countries that you've quoted, with their levels of process that they have, I'm assuming here now that we are talking industrialized, that the process that we are quoting in terms of industrialized process, you are also considering bilateral process that emanate from bilateral contracts and also self-generation. That if they actually had those high level of process, would they industrialize? So is there a link between industrialization and the cost of electricity, in your opinion? Now, coming back to the initial part of the presentation by Madame Kotalimaji, I have a couple of questions. I think the first overarching question that I'd like to ask: do you believe? Maybe let me start with this one. That firstly, do you consider that in the case of electricity, that a methodology is equivalent to the law? Is it the law? Therefore, a law which is binding 100% as it is to the administrator. Do you consider that a methodology, this particular methodology that we have, is law and therefore fully binding on the energy regulator? But the main question I want to ask on that: would you not agree that a methodology, in fact, is a means that is supposed to ensure rationality of the decision that is reached by a regulator? That is, when you have a methodology, you ensure that irrespective of who the persons that may be administering that methodology, that if a different person were to administer the same methodology, they would still reach the same decision as being reached by somebody else. That is a methodology not a means of coming up with a rational decision? If the answer to that is yes, the question I would then ask: what if you then realize that when you use a particular methodology, the outcome, the number that comes out of that methodology, yields an irrational outcome? Should that irrational outcome be implemented purely because it is an output of a methodology? Would that, in that particular case, meet the hurdle of rationality? What I mean by it is that if a methodology, if it's implemented to the T, says, for instance, the outcome should be a 50% increase in process, that's what the methodology says, which is why the first question is relevant, that says, is it law? I guess if it is law, you would say, irrespective of what the outcome would be, you are forced to actually implement that. But if the answer to that, it is not law, it's just a means and a guide to ensure rationality, would you therefore still say that if the outcome of that methodology is going to yield an irrational decision, should it still be implemented? My last question talks to your slide, I think it's slide 4, where you're talking about, let me just go back to it, I'll see because that's the one that I'm talking about. Yes, I think it is the slide 4. In terms of the requirements by other laws, MFMA and other places, that, as you know, NERSA is an independent regulator which is obliged to make independent decisions. So to the extent to which there may be requirements by other laws for submission of certain information, to what extent do you believe that the requirements of other laws are actually binding or limiting the independence of the regulator? That is, you may have prepared a particular application that may be envisaging a particular outcome, but the regulator, I would assume, would still be required to arrive at an independent decision, which might be in total variance with what was the starting point. To what extent do you believe that that process therefore binds the regulator? I think those are my questions to both of you. I will switch off my mic. And remember, again, the offer is you respond to those that you feel comfortable to respond to at the stage. You have tomorrow again to be able to incorporate any of your responses, as well as you've got the afternoon today to also maybe to guide and respond to others. And of course, the last one is that you can still respond in writing before we conclude this process. But over to you. Thank you, Madam.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Chair. I will start with some of the responses, and then my colleague, Dr. Ulrich Müller, will continue on the more technical aspects. And we'll start in sequence with Mr. Mkhize's question. I just like to point out that we absolutely make sure that we do not recover any revenue that is related to the load shedding volumes. And we do this in our regulatory clearing account. And as mentioned by our CFO yesterday, Eskom does not plan to load shed. Our production plan is geared towards making sure that we can meet the demand that is required. So there is no planning. So in forward looking, there is no plan for load shedding. But we know and we acknowledge that load shedding has and does happen, and therefore from the first regulatory clearing account that dealt with this, we have always made sure that we do not recover any revenue that has been related to load shedding. And I think we have extended that, as you might see in our more recent RCA application as far as COVID volumes are concerned as well. So I think that is very, very important to note that Eskom is taking responsibility to make sure that it doesn't ask other consumers to pay for revenue that is related to load shedding. And we feel that is a severe enough penalty, and there are no other aspects that could be considered. And we have to remember that we load shed in terms of the NERSA regulatory rule. It is done for a purpose. It is done to basically protect the system. And I would like to proudly say that we are better than certain cities, including London, in that we have managed to protect our system. And therefore, NERSA has done a good job as far as making sure that that kind of a procedure is in place to be able to deal with that. As far as the more detailed question, Ulrich will deal with that as far as prices over the years. My understanding is it does look at the years, but he will correct that. As far as now coming to the slide 4, dealing with the prudency framework, the way that we respect the prudency framework, and we were very happy when it was introduced. I think it was 2018, because it did guide us in the way that we make our application. And I think we have made that point in our submission document, and we reiterated also in our submissions that the prudency guidelines is something that guides Eskom or other licensees when they make their application legislation, but equally important, it also guides the regulator in making its decision. And just to take one example, and I'm very impressed about the gender neutrality also, in that we say it's a reasonable person. You know, we usually say reasonable man, but in this time, it's a reasonable person. Makes me feel good. So the reasonable person test is also applied. And I think that is a very important criteria for the regulator or any regulator to apply when they have to make an assessment of how particular costs have been developing. And I think so for me, that is how we see the prudency guideline. We do not see it as a separate process. And I think we take your point, Mr. Mkhize, that you made yesterday, that you want an independent prudency assessment as far as the technical aspect. We take that on board, and we will respond in writing. And also, I think some mention was made about the electricity pricing policy. Our understanding is, or alignment to the electricity pricing policy, our understanding is the electricity pricing policy is being reviewed, and it would happen imminently. And obviously that alignment to any revision will also need to continue. The electricity pricing policy is subservient to the Electricity Regulation Act, and therefore, but it has a role to play as far as guiding both the licensees as well as the regulator. Coming to Mr. Gumede's question, Dr. Menard will deal with the more technical aspects. Let me just deal with the parts that look at the first part of our presentation. The first question relates to is a methodology law, and my understanding, and this is from the Supreme Court of Appeal case, which is we fondly call the Babbitt case, which both NERSA and Eskom were on the same side at. Our understanding was, or my recollection rather, is that the judge did stipulate that because the methodology is basically unpacking the requirements of the Electricity Regulation Act, it will be seen as law. However, we do undertake to, as Chair, you have guided, that we do undertake to provide more clarity on that, and we will do so either tomorrow, and if we can't do it overnight, then we would provide that response in writing. Then moving on to the next question as far as rationality is concerned, and whether individuals interpreting a methodology will come up with either a rational or an irrational decision. I mean, our understanding is that any methodology, and let's talk more specifically about a revenue-related or a methodology that would guide on the determination of a revenue for various entities. The important aspects is what is in the law, and the law refers to making sure that efficient costs and a reasonable or a fair return are recovered. So I think that is what is the more a bigger outcome that, or a bigger picture that needs to be looked at as far as looking at how a methodology will allow that to do. And I think in our experience, we need to point out that this is the NYPD methodology, talking specifically, is an internationally recognized methodology. And I think the chair has also mentioned that in previous public hearings. And also it is a matter of how it is implemented, and that is an important aspect. And we do acknowledge that there has been consultation processes that have been undertaken as far as the development of the NYPD methodology is concerned, and the regulator has taken that input on board, and there have been some finer tuning of the NYPD methodology through the years from when it was first introduced. And I think the last question deals with other laws that might impact on the ability of the regulator to implement whatever decision it wants to. Again, that is a challenge that we all have to live with. You know, we have myriads of laws that an entity like Eskom needs to comply with, and we have to make sure that we abide by all of them. And that is a challenge. And sometimes, you know, they might be sort of processes that need to be undertaken, as you are aware, in certain instances within Eskom, that we have to now decide on how we're going to deal with those particular things. So we cannot now, in my opinion, have to say, well, this law is impacting me. Then we as citizens need to think about how we need to be able to correct that, and when there are opportunities to deal with that, then we'll have to deal with that. But when a law is a law, we all have to abide by the law, and that is the situation that we find ourselves in a similar situation that I'm understanding the chair is saying that NERSA finds itself, but it is something that one needs to be balanced and be looked at. So I think I'm going to stop at there, and then Dr. Mina will deal with the rest of them. Thank you, Chair.
Okay. Thank you, Asha. In terms of the questions, if I start sort of at the top, in terms of the prices and the price comparisons and how they were done, those prices are done year for year. So each year the exchange rates are taken into account, and it's done on an annual basis. It is the cost to the consumer. That is the basis on which those prices are done. So if I go to the question of, yeah, okay, let's start with Mr. McKee's question. Taking into account living standards and those kind of things, that comparison was done strictly on a cost to the consumer basis. So the consumer typically, you know, his cost of living, those factors have to come into account, but the actual cost of production as well. In terms of the China slide, the years relevant to that one, Eskom and the China prices were done for 2018, for the 2018 year. I included cost comparisons to 2020 because after the exchange rate differences between 2018 and 2020, it was flat. So I was comfortable putting it in as an indicative comparison between those years for the municipalities. Mr. Mkhize's question relating to South Africa's pride in being the lowest cost supplier of electricity at the stage. That is a policy question, and if we look at it in retrospect, we maintained low prices because we, as a country, we were not providing capital for future generation expansion. So in a measure, I would say that it was a false low price. We should have been catering for future capital investments, and we had not been. And so subsequent to that, you either need capital injections or significantly steep increases. So what went wrong? I think it's easy to say in hindsight that at the time a different approach may have led to a different outcome for the industry as a whole. And so while our prices are still low, the cost of that is that we're running at sub-cost reflective prices, which is again going to have follow-on consequences for the industry in terms of the reliability of supply that customers see. Moving to Mr. Gumede's question about the cost of load shedding and the inclusion of the cost of load shedding and what the message there is. I see Mr. Mkhize has a hand up. I think I should respond to that before I carry on. Mr. Mkhize?
No, I'm chairing.
Okay.
Can I chair? If you allow me to chair, please. Can I ask Mr. Mkhize to just hold on, so that, because we unfortunately with your presentations we tend to overrun badly. We intend to lose we tend to take more than an hour and a half. But nonetheless, if you allow Mr. Mkhize, can I allow him to respond to all the questions, and then I'll take the second round, please, if you don't mind. Thanks.
All right. Okay. So in terms then of the message around the cost of load shedding. It's included one to show a reflection and investigation on Eskom's part of what the impact is on the economy, and there's not a link to the price of electricity to the consumer per se. As your question asked, should we be comparing the price to the cost of load shedding? No, that is not the intention of that slide. Where the cost of load shedding does come into account significantly is when we look at running our most expensive generation plant, your peaking plant. The cost of load shedding is then 3 times what it costs to run OCGTs. So further running of OCGTs is a lower cost to the economy than actually load shedding is. So it's not as a direct comparison to the tariff. 953 is a significantly out of range high amount, and I think we could all be comfortable saying that it's not a comparative cost to tariffs. In terms of the tariffs and whether they include or exclude taxes, that comparison was strictly done on the cost to the consumer. As a consumer, whether there are taxes included or excluded, it doesn't make a difference to what you are paying at the end of the day. You pay that price. So in terms of apples to apples, it was really done on an apples to apples basis of what consumers pay in the various jurisdictions. And that is how that was done. In terms of the last question about a link between the cost of electricity and industrialization, I think that's a not so direct relationship. Where there is a strong link is between reliable and adequate supply of electricity and your tariffs, in terms of your tariffs being cost reflective. If you have non-cost reflective tariffs, inevitably you're going to have inadequate supply, and your reliability will be reduced. And so then what happens is countries where they've got adequate reliability and supply, in many cases, well, then they have industrialization, because industry can then produce their output on a consistent basis, and the cost of poor reliability, as we've indicated, is significant to those industries. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Again, because it's just the two of us, ordinarily we do only allow 10 minutes for questions and answers. I think it's just in terms of respect for other presenters that might be on the program. But I'll allow follow-up. Mr. Mkhize, if you can follow up, please.
It's a brief follow-up that I don't expect a response right here and now, but it's going to be important to include it, because when it comes to this study, I think there's a need to then factor in the South African dimension, as well as look at the price build-up, because one will have to look at the mechanism, the pricing mechanism for those individual countries, to then really get a comparison of apples to apples. If you can just assist with that going forward, because it's something that I think is sitting outside of this application per se, but it's what we can do going forward and assist this process. And please also clarify the issue of London, because it could be misinterpreted in your submissions. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Mkhize, for that quick follow-up. This thing is working.
Thank you, Chair. We'll respond tomorrow or in writing. Thank you very much.
With my mic today. Can you hear me? Okay.
Yes, we can.
Yes, we can.
All right. So now what I was going to say was that thank you, Mr. Mkhize, for your quick follow-up. But as you respond tomorrow, remember you have to also, colleagues, respond also to the issues. When you're talking about you as a company, you are cheaper than particular countries. I'm not sure how that becomes an apple for apple comparison. But remember, there's an issue that's being said here that says you can produce electricity using renewable energies at 43 cents per kilowatt hour. And some of those countries that we are comparing ourselves with are well ahead of us in terms of using solar, perhaps, and other renewable energies. So you must be able to respond to that. So if, for instance, we are sitting at the wholesale price of 166, whatever, 250. I'm not sure what the number is going to end up being after this, after the changes this year. You must be able to respond to that. Please talk to that in your formal response, either tomorrow or in writing. Please, you need to be able to indicate and incorporate the views that have been presented in this platform, where people are saying, why are we deploying or forcing on them Eskom and the grid, when in fact there are cheaper renewable energy sources to the tune of 43 cents per kilowatt hour? Why are we then continuing down this path? So I really plead with you to actually do that. And also, I think, as you know, and I'm hoping that other stakeholders who are coming on board, maybe not today, maybe tomorrow, would be able to also present different figures in terms of talking about companies now that are operating in some of the domains that you have indicated. They'll be able to give you the actual figures or some of the indicative figures in terms of what they actually pay in those countries. But with that, it is 1424. We'd like to thank Eskom again for the information they are sharing with the stakeholders, for their informative presentations, whether you agree with them or you don't. The fact is that is the information as they hand and as they have, and it's the facts and evidence that they have that they are presenting to you and to us as the regulator. With that, just like to thank you again, Eskom, for your presentation. Looking forward to further engagements, and maybe you may still come back later in terms of your last 15 minutes at the end of the day. With that, could we then move to the next presenter, who is Mr. Morne Mostert from AfriForum? Are you available, sir?
Yes, I am. Thank you very much, Chair.
Thank you. We can see you as well. Great. Thank you. Before we start, as you know, it's customary. Would you object to taking an oath?
No.
Okay. With that, kindly raise your right hand and affirm the following. Do you solemnly declare that the evidence we are going to give, or the information we are going to give to this panel, is the truth and the whole truth as you know it?
Yes, I do.
For the record, please state your name, the organization that you are representing today, and your designation therein, please.
My name is Morne Mostert. I am representing the views of AfriForum non-profit organization in South Africa.
Thank you. As indicated, you have 15 minutes. I'm not sure if you're making a PowerPoint presentation or a verbal one.
No, I don't think I'm going to make the PowerPoint presentation. I will just give oral evidence.
All right. No, thank you. With that, you've got 15 minutes, sir. And again, I'm struggling with my mic. I'll keep it on. I'm hoping that it won't disturb you. Thank you.
Perfect. Thank you very much, Chair. Just an introduction, AfriForum is a civil rights organization within South Africa with aims, among others, for constructive participation in matters of government, such as making submissions regarding Eskom applications or NASA, other public participation processes, not only on behalf of our members, but also in general within the public interest. AfriForum has been active in the energy industry for several years, making submissions regarding applications of electricity price increases, RCAs, and we will continue to take part in most of the processes that is handled by NASA. Currently, AfriForum has 298,000 members within South Africa, and we have more than 150 active branches across South Africa that actively take part in service delivery issues. But those issues include, obviously, the electricity tariff increases. So just for background for this application, Eskom is a company with the obligation not only to generate power, but to do so in such a way that is effective, affordable, and prudent. Eskom has further an obligation to incur only lawful operational and capital expenditure in the execution of their licensed activities. NASA is obviously the juristic person with the authority to regulate this generation and the tariff industry of Eskom. and they have to consider the Eskom's applications as it is determined by the NYPD methodology, ERA, and various other legislation. I do think that the NYPD that we are currently using for this application has certain criteria for expenses to be, or operating expenses to be allowed within this revenue application. The expenses must be incurred in normal operation of production and supply of electricity, including an acceptable for refurbishment, repairs, and maintenance costs. The expenses must be prudently and efficiently incurred after careful considerations of all available options. These are the obligations that is set out by the NYPD methodology on the manner in which Eskom not only hands in their application, but their active day-to-day participation within the electricity industry. The expenses must be incurred at arm's length within these transactions. Eskom must have a competitive procurement policy that demonstrates to the regulator that it has been strictly adhered to within the procurement process. Within Eskom's session just now, it was mentioned that they ought to comply with these and other legislative measures within the South African context, and they must do everything that they can to actually fall within the bounds of these legislations. So the question then arises, did Eskom actually comply with the standards or that is being set out within the NYPD to be able to request the 20% tariff increase within their application? Did they meet this criteria? I would just like for the record to read in some of the statements made within the SCOPA briefing note of Eskom's audit outcome for the years of 2020 to 2021. If I refer to page 6, where there is a headline of material findings on the compliance of applicable legislation. And this is where the importance of legislation comes in, but it also speaks to the question that was made by NASHA to ask if the NYPD does not fully cater to make a reasonable or a rational decision. The question that should be, or the question that should be answered also by Eskom was how their expenses was made and the process that they took to make these decisions, and that falls within the prudency test that NASHA should make, not only, and I do think it's correct to say, not only within this tariff process or the NYPD process, but it also should be a continuous process from NASHA to ensure that all licensees, which includes municipalities, actually go do prudency testing on their regards as well. But just on the material findings, I will make certain averments that was made within this report to the SCOPA committee. Expenditure management. Effective and appropriate steps were not taken to prevent irregular expenditure. Effective and appropriate steps were not taken to prevent fruitful and wasteful expenditure. On the heading of procurement and contract management, it states the following. Availability of records to support procurement activities is a matter that requires intervention at Eskom. Most of the transactions selected for auditing could not be tested as information was not submitted, meaning that there was a lack of even just supplying these relevant information. This resulted in the following material limitations of scope. Inefficient appropriate audit evidence that awards to suppliers on established panels were in accordance with the legislative requirements, as a proper record keeping of such awards were not maintained. Similar limitations were also reported on the previous year. Sufficient and appropriate audit evidence that goods works, services were procured through a procurement process which is fair, equitable, transparent, competitive, cost-effective as required by the PFMA. And non-compliance of this paragraph was also reported the previous year. Insufficient appropriate audit evidence that contracts and quotations were awarded in accordance with the Preferential Procurement Policy Framework Act and its regulations. Non-compliance with these paragraphs were also reported the previous year. Insufficient audit evidence that construction of contracts were awarded to contractors that were registered with the Construction Industry Development Board. Similar limitation was also reported to the previous year. And there is it continues, but I think one of the important points that AfriForum also would like to state categorically is if you continue to the consequence management. If it is true that there is certain problems that occurs within Eskom with their procurement processes, one would hope that an efficient licensee will have a rigorous consequence management. But if we look at these material findings within this audit report, and I will quote as follows: efforts to drive accountability and consequence management are hampered by a lack of audit evidence to support the steps taken to ensure consequence management. As a result, the following limitations of scope were reported: insufficient appropriate audit evidence that the appropriate disciplinary steps were taken against officials who had incurred irregular, fruitless, and wasteful expenditure. This was because investigations into some of the instances of irregular, fruitless, and wasteful expenditure were not performed. Insufficient and appropriate audit evidence that allegations of financial misconduct against persons in service of the entity were investigated. This was due to proper and complete records that were not maintained as evidence to support the investigations into allegations of financial misconduct committed by persons in the service of the entity. A similar limitation was also reported the previous year. The next point was insufficient appropriate audit evidence that allegations of theft, fraud, extortion, forgery, uttering a forged document which exceeded 100,000 Rand were reported to SAPS as required by Section 34 of the PRECCA. A similar limitation was also reported the previous year. So although we have seen within Eskom's debt burden has been eased, the power utility is still plagued by the lack of careful expense management, procurement processes, and maladministration. These problems is not a new story or is not news for Eskom during this application. These problems have been continuing for a number of years, and it doesn't seem that Eskom is currently, or rather, it seems to us that having an efficient licensee, that these problems will not continue within this matter. Now, it was not specifically stated within this report, but in previous audit committees, it was a very important fact of when auditing certain contracts of Eskom, there is a materiality cap. That means that usually only, let's say, within those audits, the auditors only looked at contracts that were higher amount than 25 million Rand. So the question is, if an audit report goes and it makes these findings on only procurement processes that are larger than 25 million, in what dismal state does Eskom have with contracts that are of a lower value than 25 million? So it boils down to, I think, two extremely important paragraphs that was made within the Borbet judgment, Borbet that was also previously referred to in this in Eskom's presentation, and it is paragraph 110 that I would quote is, NASHA's task is to maintain a balance between Eskom's sustainability as a business and a reasonable tariff stability, as well as appropriately allocate commercial risk between Eskom and its customers. That is not to say that NASHA is obliged to approve variances due to maladministration at Eskom's part, as I have just read from the audited findings. It continues in paragraph 119 to say, the judge said, I appreciate that South African taxpayers and electricity consumers are exhausted by the constant historical failures by Eskom. Even a few years later, this is patently still true. Whether Eskom is penalized by NASHA through the imposition of a fine, or whether the request for a tariff adjustment is granted or denied, the taxpayer and the consumer ultimately appear to be the ones who bear the financial burden. Eskom is a strategic national asset, which the court confirmed, but what is required from Eskom is optimum efficiency and accountability. NASHA, as its sole shareholder, NASHA and its sole shareholder, the government, are tasked to ensure that result. And I want to emphasize this. What is required from Eskom is optimum efficiency and accountability. So the big question then asks, did Eskom with this revenue application prove to us that the whole part of their application is prudent and efficient? AfriForum categorically says it isn't, and we want that no illegal or imprudent costs should be, should be implemented with a tariff increase, as there is a large problem, in our opinion, regarding the manner in which Eskom has handled their affairs, and they, with the audit findings, it shows that they do not, they are not an efficient, optimum efficient licensee, and we are very pro having NASHA doing a prudency test constantly with all licensees that includes municipalities, but especially with Eskom having that their application having a large impact on South African residents. The last comments that AfriForum would like to submit is that NASHA has a very large responsibility to be able to, in its decision-making powers, to defend its decisions in court. We have seen that there's a few court cases that we have studied, and it is a very, let me rather put it as such, NASHA should take note of the high probability of Eskom to start a review process of its decision if it's not going to be happy with NASHA's decision regarding this electricity price increase. This means that NASHA must ensure that the process that they are handling at this stage falls within the occurrence of the administrative law, or PAJA, but furthermore that the reasons thereof, there should not be a problem where they challenge the reasons given by NASHA. And I want to bring this to light to say, we hope that we can have a bit of tariff stability within South Africa, where we can, NASHA can make these decisions. In conclusion, I would like to submit that to ensure that NASHA must ensure that imprudent costs by Eskom is not passed on to consumers by way of a tariff increase, and that NASHA fulfill its mandate by regulating the management of electricity, of its tariffs and mechanisms, and remedies its disposal to ensure efficient economic and effective use of resources. Thank you very much, Chair.
Thank you very much, Mr. Mostert, for your input. I'll now open up the discussion to my colleagues. Well, I guess today is just Mr. Mkhize. Mr. Mkhize, any questions for Mr. Mostert?
Thanks, Chairperson, and thanks, Mr. Mostert. I just want to state that would appreciate that even what we are reading through, if you can send it to NERSA. But over and above that, if there are any specific decisions that arose from the use of the MYPD methodology that you found irrational or whose rationality is questionable, please also highlight those and how you suggest that this be remedied. If there are specific, even also if there are specific cases of imprudence or whose imprudence is really in question, I think highlighting them will assist in the regulator probing further, as you would appreciate that this is a big entity that we are dealing with, and the time frames may not be, allowing detail enough in terms of doing a prudency assessment in all its respects. I will leave it at that. If you just, I would appreciate if you oblige to providing that information. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Mkhize. Mr. Mostert, maybe can I just pose 3 questions? It's really just for guidance on our side. How do you suggest, you've read very nicely your input, and as Mr. Mkhize has indicated, we really appreciate your submission of that report to us. But the question that that worries me, or that maybe guidance you can offer us, if there are audit findings of that sort, how do we, as the regulator, include them as we finalize the revenue application? For instance, the question I ask is just a specific example. So, for instance, with audit findings, firstly, they tend not necessarily to be too detailed. If they indicated and said such and such and such a cost there were problems with that particular cost, and therefore perhaps would you then suggest that if it's been explicit like that perhaps that particular cost can then be excluded from the application? But the question I ask, linked to this as well, is that with audits by their very nature, if there has been an unauthorized expenditure, not fruitless and wasteful, which I would understand that there was no output that was found, but if it was unauthorized expenditure, for instance, that is perhaps certain procedures were not followed, at least not followed to the T, does that mean that expenditure invariably is an imprudent expenditure? If not, how then do we tackle it? How then? I guess I'm just trying maybe for guidance to say, we do have all of these audits. How does the regulator, in fact, use those audits in terms of finalizing an application from Eskom? Thank you.
Okay. Thank you very much, and thank you for not making it easy for me to answer your questions. But I do think on the first question that was posed by Chair, I think when I did my research for the submissions for today, I was not able to find the large or the whole audit report of that was audited within Eskom. The usual larger financial reports categorically or focuses on specific large contracts. We had in the past where we had, Kusile and those different matters that were focused on within the financial reports, which made it easy for us as stakeholders to actually add specific numbers to that. And I had the problem this time of not being able to receive those documents, or those that I did get were not specific in the contract. So I do think that maybe as part of the prudency test, it will be able, or I think it would be good if, as part of this process, and NASA can request from Eskom's side as part of their application or as part of this public participation process to request from Eskom a more a fully financial statements to ensure that you can go specifically see what projects that have what procurement problems, so that's the one thing that I think it's part of this process. NASA has, as the regulator, has the ability to request these specific information from Eskom themselves to be able to see which of these costs should not be absorbed by the consumer or which should be. But at this stage, I did not have the relevant information, but I do think Eskom as the regulator can request this information from Eskom. On to the second point with regards to the if a cost is unauthorized, does it equal that it is imprudent? I think our version would be as follows, is that it was also stated by Eskom themselves that they need to adhere to certain legislation. If it is the PFMA, if it is environmental legislation, they should confer with it. Not, if an cost is unauthorized and the auditor recommends or sends the report back to Eskom, they can actually go back and correct these findings, which they have done in the past as well. But as it stands now, I don't think it's if the requirement, as Borbet has stated, is optimum efficiency and to ensure that an efficient licensee can recover all of their costs through an application, I think it's important that that standard should go through to its books. And if there is a legislative requirement and NASA as a licensee does not fulfill that requirement, I think it should be the general rule then should be that it should be imprudent costs. Obviously, the general rule there is different. There could be places where the general rule does not apply. But I do think that if there is a legislative standard, usually in NASA's eyes, that must not be seen as a prudent. I think it's in the earlier judgment of Borbet that says prudency, excuse me, it's within the NASA's own prudency guidelines, where it says prudency is not only about if the cost was handled effectively, but also the process it went through to get to that point. And on that grounds, I do think that if a decision is not made within a legislative manner, it does not fall in the scope of being a prudent and efficient cost. For the rest of the information, I will send you the information as requested, Mr. Mkhize. So I will also send this information part that I drafted. Thank you very much, Chair.
Thank you very much, Mr. Morne Mostert, and we thank you, Forum, for letting you, giving you an opportunity to come and present to the stakeholders. But thank you very much.
Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. So we're looking forward to your written submissions. All right. The next presenter is Ms. Nicole Jansen.
That's correct, Chair. Thank you so much for the opportunity.
So can I understand, is it Mr. Nicole or is this Miss Nicole? Because it says here Miss Nicole Jansen.
It's only the spelling that is incorrect, and that give you the idea that it's Mrs. So please take out the E at the end. It's only Nicole, like Nicolas.
Nicolas. Okay.
Yeah, that will help you a lot.
All right. No, thank you. All right. With that, now that we've got the facts correct, before we start, as you would know, we start with the swearing in. Do you object to taking an oath or an affirmation?
Not at all, Chair.
In that case, can you kindly raise your hand and affirm the following? Do you solemnly declare that the information and the evidence you're going to give to this panel is the truth and the whole truth?
I do, Chair.
Okay, for the record, and also just to correct the spelling. If you can kindly maybe state your name, the entity that you are representing, and your designation therein, please.
Thank you, Chair. I'm Nicol Jansen. I'm the president of Agri Northern Cape, and I'm a farmer as well.
All right. Thank you, Mr. Jansen. You've got your 15 minutes. We start now.
Thank you, Chair. Can I share screen, please? And I want to know if you can see my presentation.
Yes, we can see your presentation, and it's now on the presentation mode. Thank you. You can proceed.
Thank you, Chair. I really appreciate. So Agri Northern Cape is a provincial affiliate of Agri South Africa. So we represent the agricultural sector in the Northern Cape. Chair, agriculture is dependent on electricity. Irrigation gave the stability in fruit production. We have a cold chain that is very important for us. We're responsible for the country's food security as well as Southern Africa. So we can't take Eskom crisis lightly. Agriculture are not ignorant towards Eskom financial challenges. And agriculture must take their own financial well-being in consideration in cohesion of the rest of the economy. So agriculture is also very important for South Africa in terms of food security. Highly concerned about the cost of electricity, above inflation increases and the financial impact thereof. We're highly concerned about energy certainty. That is quite a problem in the last year. The economy of the Northern Cape, Chair, is mostly dependent on agriculture. It's the second biggest contribution to the BBP. And out of this contribution, the last agricultural intensive irrigation areas along the rivers make out a big impact on that. We are the largest labor market in agriculture is the irrigation sector that use electricity. So therefore, we are dependent on electricity, and it's important to find a balance between affordability and access to energy. Chair, but I do have a question. My question is, what is the proposed price of energy to give the income stream to Eskom to meet expenses, working capital, as well as debt service, to maintain the inflation-related increase? If Eskom have today a blank check, what will the increase be to be in a position? We heard that Mr. Andre de Ruyter says that even this 20.5% increase will not bring us to that. So is it a 50% or 100% increase? The price has already been doubled the past 5 years. So my question is, can South Africa afford the price of electricity that Eskom needs to maintain himself? And you talk about rational, and is it rational to go there? So I think we can say to each other, to get to a price where Eskom can make its meat, it's unaffordable for the South African economy. So therefore, Chair, we can't keep on focusing on increase of tariffs year on year on year, and we are in a direction that we will not get to an end where Eskom can maintain himself, and the South African economy and the public and agriculture can afford the price of electricity. So we are busy. Are we busy solving the problem with a 20% increase of tariff? I don't think we are busy doing that, Chair. So we can't keep on working in a self-destruction direction, buying time and hope that the unavoidable will not happen. The cash flow of South African economy can't afford this path, neither can agriculture. So therefore, we have to do something else. Now, Eskom was criticized on their salary expenses, and rightly so. And action was early retirement and voluntary separation packages that bring down the number of employees within Eskom. But the way Eskom is doing it ends up in the exit of highly needed, qualified, experienced employees entering the private sector with success, and it leaves Eskom with lower skilled, lower experienced, and less favorable workforce. So therefore, this is my first comment. Eskom should take another approach in terms of their personnel expenses. The other method that Eskom uses is no new employment. And that leads to personnel shortages in critical service delivery areas, resulting in poor service delivery and less energy sales. Especially when there's outages in the agricultural sector, there's not enough electricians to deal with it, and it ends up that certain clients have 24 hours and up to 3 days without electricity, but still paying service fees and energy demand charges, as well as capacity charges, and they don't have electricity. The business model is responsible for the drop of energy sales and didn't reach income targets, and it forced to claw back on lost income streams. So therefore, just raising the cost of electricity is not a sustainable business model for Eskom. So tariff increases alone is not the answer. All we see is focus on tariff increases the past few years. I'm attending these NERSA public hearings for 13 years now, presenting on them all, and that is the only focus that I can see, or the biggest focus that I can see, is the increase of tariffs. And as the previous speaker indicated, there's a lot of other stuff that can be done to be more sufficient in terms of spending. So the result of tariff increases, and why I'm saying it's not the correct path, is energy sales in the 10 years from 2008 to 18 have decreased. So you're a company selling of energy, and now you're selling less and less energy, making it more expensive, and this trend is keeping on. So the sales drop with 1% per year further in 2020. Or it was 1% per year for 10 years and a further 1.3% in 2020. So clearly, just increasing tariffs is not the right model if you have to get your earnings from the sales of electricity. The primary income stream of Eskom is energy sales. Less to sell, increase of tariff put further pressure on sales, and it did not take Eskom forward in capacity or efficiency. So the business model not suitable for sustainable in energy generation and supply for the next 30 years. We can't keep on this path for the next 30 years. The price tendency will keep increase without any results. So in terms of the agricultural sector, we have challenges ourselves. You see in the slide, one of the previous presenters, that agriculture was hit quite hard in terms of load shedding. But in terms of our profitability, we have huge challenges. Our input costs in the irrigation areas have increased dramatically. We absorbed a 16% in labor cost, a 34.5% in fuel cost the past year. Fertilizers is going through the roof. I give you an indication of some of the products that increased with 240, 260, 140%, 190%. So that is what we need to grow our product. So we are price takers in the agricultural sector. We can't pass it on to the consumer. The prices of the products is formed on the international market, and therefore our profitability is under severe pressure. So what is the elephant in the room, Chair? The elephant in the room is a lot of money within Eskom has been lost due to corruption, and it captures Eskom sustainability. Eskom also uncovered that a syndicate is stealing approximately 100 million worth of oil per month from the Tugeta power station. Now, the previous public hearing in 2020 with the RCI application, Eskom gave us the assurance that there's measures in place to bring this corruption to light. Now we are a year further and it's still been reported in the media. I just put on a few headlines that I find in the media. Other headline that I found is Eskom staff arrested for spares fraud. Another highlight that I get in the media is 2 Eskom employees and a supplier to the utility have been arrested and charged with theft, fraud and corruption. Eskom and Tugeta power station in particular continues to be the scene of the most despicable of crimes perpetrating by some of the very people tasked with the stewardship of this public institution by unscrupulous suppliers, said Eskom CEO Andre de Ruyter. Former Eskom executive appears in court over 745 million in Kushele. And I can go on, you can read it yourselves. So therefore, Chair, just to increase the prices and put this burden on the agricultural sector and civil society is not a way. And the previous slide didn't give us the trust in Eskom that they've been dealt on a prudent way and a responsible way with the money that they earn in terms of electricity. In terms of affordability, Chair, the comparison of tariffs to other countries is not apples to apples in terms of affordability. As you rightly stated, taxes, salaries, state subsidies make other countries a huge difference in terms of affordability. So don't be blindfolded by a slide indicating Eskom's electricity is cheap. It's not cheap for the residents of South Africa with a 40% unemployment, 0 to 1% economic growth, 40 to 50% taxation, we have a 15% VAT. And taking all this into account, then the Eskom tariffs is not affordable in South Africa. So what needs to be done? We have to be brave enough to implement the hard, unavoidable business decisions. We don't have a choice. We have to clean Eskom of corruption unforgivingly. And we have to start prosecute. We have to get the trust back of the agricultural sector and civil society out there. We have to regain losses. That is where the income stream should be, is regaining losses before we ask for tariff increases from the consumer. Stabilize the debt of Eskom. I noticed the past year there's the debt is slightly less, and therefore there should be renewed focus so that Eskom will not ruin South Africa financially. Then there was also a suggestion to sell old power stations. The National Treasury feasibility work show the possible income of 400 billion. Why not taking a better look at that option? Stop capital spending on new generation capacity. Eskom blow his chance. Eskom failed, and they show it with Medupi and Kushele, not been able to build new power stations. So leave that for the private market, for the free markets out there, to invest in generation capacity. Eskom ends up with 300% overspending. In terms of Kushele and these newly built generation plants, billions in design flaws and 7 years behind schedule in their own attempts. So let us not do that again. Adapt legislation to allow private investment, fill generation space and shortages with private capital expenditure and investment in the private sector. Employer certainty to core personnel, be skill enriched, make sure there's enough to deliver the service so that the clients can be satisfied and paying their bills. And that is a huge shortage on this side in terms of maintenance and repairing outages on this stage, especially in the rural areas. We have to have an independent grid so that the grid operator can buy energy of the best price for the best time and break the monopoly of Eskom. That is what will take us forward. Implement recommendations of the President's Ramaphosa panel, chaired by Anton Eberhard. There was also a lot of good suggestions in that recommendations. Chair, no more tariff increases. It's suicide for Eskom as well. It decreased sales volumes and it forced into RCA applications year on year. So this is not the solution. Allow the private economy, investment-friendly environment to fill up energy opwekking. No increase in fixed costs. Chair, this is a very important stuff, and I can just quickly show you Eskom bill to make my point clear. I hope I have time for that and can find it quickly. More actions. Where can I share my another screen?
You have less than a minute, unfortunately.
I will finish in a minute, Chair. Can you see this on my screen? Can you see the Eskom bill, Chair?
Not yet.
Enter for... Chair, let me explain. The minute is running out. I'm so disappointed that you can't see it. Maybe it's not, it's on my side, not getting the right actions quick enough. Is that better, Chair?
Yes, yeah, the actual bill has come through.
Thank you, Chair. Chair, take a look at this. This is the fixed cost we're talking about. You see that the total bill is 26,000 Rand in this example, but the fixed cost is around about 10,000 Rand. Now, if Eskom apply for revenue and then make a calculation what the percentage increase should be, they can't increase this fixed cost as well as they did the past 13 to 15 years. That have to stop. And that is the ERSA methodology gives Eskom, or allow Eskom to do that. And agriculture is of the opinion that NERSA have to take a good look at that ERSA document and stop increasing the fixed cost and let that rather increase in terms of actual cost of what it costs there, or rather be on a inflation related increase. But if they need more money, so that the actual energy usage, so that part rather increase. So please, Chair, take a good look on this very important, and not increasing the fixed cost. So therefore, in conclusion, Chair, agriculture can't afford a 20%. It's suicide for Eskom, and agriculture will definitely not be in a position to accommodate that. The cost of energy is a contributing factor to the change in the composition of the food basket in South Africa. We don't have a choice. It's a free market out there. So we have to produce more for exports, less for local market. And that constrains food security in South Africa. And it's directly linked to the cost of energy. So worst case scenario, inflation related, but nothing more. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Mania. Yes, you were just over by a minute or two, but thank you for your presentation. Well laid out points. Mr. Mkhize, any questions for Mania Jansen?
Yes, thanks, Chairperson, and thanks, Mr. Hansen. I note the issues you raised in answer to your question as to what needs to be done. As you highlighted, that tariff increases alone is not the answer. But I just want to check from your side. If you're saying no tariff increase, are you also in dispute with disputing the figures that decisions have already been taken? There's in terms of in the form of RCAs, or you're saying that those should be kept as they are, but not give any further increase on top of that. You talk of the sales drop of 1% per annum. The second question, is there any scope for any increase in sales in the agricultural sector in the Northern Cape province? Just want to understand if there is any scope there. With regard to leaving construction of power stations to the private sector, noting the challenges that when that position was assumed in previous years, it did not yield the desired outcome, to the extent that Eskom then had to come in late to build those power plants. What is your comment with regard to that? What would be different in this case? And then, yeah, I think those are just my questions. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Mkhize. Mr. Jansen, I've got a couple of questions for you as well. You can note them. You know, the first one is going to be a direct one, maybe just for guidance, maybe also as what I would call a boundary condition, even for people that are making these decisions. What's your, if you can maybe just, it may just be just something applicable to the Northern Cape, but what is your view of what is the maximum price in this competitive environment, electricity price that you think your members can bear? What is the price that you think your members can bear? That is, at what point do you believe that if the electricity price got to a particular point, that you might as well close shop and change your business and go into something else other than irrigated agriculture? If you can maybe prefer a number. That's my first question to you. The second question relates to, I couldn't help noticing in terms of the numbers that we are presenting, that for fuel, you've noticed a 34.5% increase in fuel. Now, it raises two questions for me, because as you know, Eskom uses primary energy, of which one of them is, I guess, diesel. It uses primary energy to generate electricity. So they indicate that if you're asking of them to ask for an increase which is inflation related, but some of our costs, as Eskom would say, are themselves not as inflation related. Take this fuel number of 34%, because they also use fuel, but they're saying, but what should we do with the, are we expected to absorb that? So that is the first question that comes out of this. What is fair for Eskom? So the second question that is linked to this is that it's just a tongue-in-cheek question. So if you could if the industry can absorb a 34% increase in fuel cost, surely, if you're looking at the fairness of situations and whatever this 200% increases in fertilizer and other costs, and 16% increase in labor, surely Eskom must also be allowed to also, is it not reasonable to expect Eskom to also be feeling the pinch and therefore be asking such numbers as they may be asking? It's just a question that I'm posing to you, and I just want to hear your philosophical answer to that. The last question that I have for you, well, I guess I'm not sure that it's a question, but you've indicated, for instance, that National Treasury has indicated that if you were to sell power stations, you could raise some in the order of 400 million. Now, the question is, I'm wondering which power plants would those that needs to be sold. Are we talking about a sale of old coal power stations? Bought by who? Because I would assume that whoever must buy them, they put a value because they see an earning potential from it. Now, we have environmental taxes, we've got all of the issues that are related to coal-fired power stations. The question that I ask is, what is the probability that if those power stations are sold or offered for sale, that in fact you will get somebody that will be willing to buy something that probably, once it changes hands and it's in his hands, they may not actually be able to even sell a kilowatt hour coming out of it. What is the probability of that solution being a realistic solution? I know it's not your solution, Mr. Moses. I'm just requesting, I guess, a philosophical answer from you. Thank you. Over to you, sir.
Thank you, Chair. Chair, the first question, do we dispute the RCA application as well? Chair, we dispute any increases above inflation, if it's RCA related or it's a new tariff application, as in this case, due to the fact that we are of the opinion that there can be more sufficient money management within Eskom, and the burden of mismanaging, if that is the correct word, for all the corruption that is still within Eskom is now just paying over to the consumer and to the clients of Eskom. So if the civil society out there have full trust in Eskom, that there's no more corruption, no more unfruitful spending, absolutely effective money management, then it will be a whole other story. But on this stage, the evidence is there that this is not the case. In terms of sales drop, did Mr. Makize ask if there's scope for increase in terms of energy usage? Did I understand the question correct?
Yes. Is there scope for increase in terms of usage from your side?
Yes, absolutely. There's definitely scope for more energy that can be used. We have to spend a lot of money to be more energy sufficient. There's also in terms of crop decisions that we have to make in terms of affordability of Eskom. So due to the fact that it's not affordable, certain crops can't be produced anymore, especially in terms where there's no scale of economy. You can't farm with cash crops anymore. You have to farm with more long-term crops that make use of more sufficient watering, and you have to force to make that capital expenses. So at the end of the day, there is scope for more using of electricity. There's scope for expansion. A lot of land is still available for development, but due to the fact that we have to pump quite high, you use a lot of electricity, and that make that development is not is not sustainable due to the cost of electricity. So if we have a drop in electricity, that whole developments can go ahead, and a lot of more electricity can be used. So definitely there's scope for more electricity sales if it's more affordable. Power stations in the private sector, Chair, why it should be, I think it will be more better if the private sector, or more efficient if the private sector can build the power stations. I just take a look at the hospitals, the private hospitals that is built in the Northern Cape. It was fairly within budget. It was on time finished, and it can be taken up in the economy. And that is not related in terms where government or state-owned entities have building programs. It's always late. It's always over budget, and there's always more cost around it. So therefore, the private sector have more checks and balances in place. And what I'm taking note of around me is that the private sector is much more efficient in terms of that. The maximum price, Jay, you ask how much money is left in the pig where you get the petty cash. I think it's not a easy question to say what can agriculture afford, because then it will empty all the scope that there is in terms of profitability, and it differs from each sector to another sector within the agricultural sector. But taking in account that certain crops can't be produced anymore in the Northern Cape due to the cost of electricity, I can tell you we're nearly on that level of maximum price of electricity. The other big phenomenon that is busy getting momentum is scale of economy. Smaller farmers is just leaving the industry. They can't get their points together anymore, and it's only the bigger enterprises that can still have a profit margin, and that is due to increased input cost and the lower profitability, and therefore it's much more difficult to get new intruders. No, that's not the correct word. Into the agricultural sector, new farmers, small-scale farmers, it's very hard because the economy don't allow it due to high prices, and electricity cost as well of them. Then in terms of fuel cost, that is not inflation related. Yes, Chair, it's absolutely so that Eskom also been binded by input cost that is above inflation. But again, Chair, the moment that we not reading anymore of 100 million per month that is stolen within Eskom, and the Eskom is 100% efficient, then we can have trust in each other, and then we can talk and put out everyone books on the table and see what is the best for the country for energy supply, so as well as the agricultural sector. But as long as that kind of money is just flowing out of Eskom without control, no prosecution taking place, then you can't empty the profitability of a sector and minimalize the profitability of a sector. And on the other hand, where the money is going, there's this holes in the bucket and money is just flowing out. Then which is sold, which power stations can be sold. Chair, I will go back to the origin of that article. It was a member of parliament stated that, and I don't have it with me. That one I will send you in writing, the article where the calculation has been made, or the presumption has been made that there's definitely value in looking into sell of some of these power stations. And if I remember correct, there's opportunity to bring them to more efficiency and bring in a renewable part into this generating plants. But I will get the origin of this article and send it to NASA. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you very, very much. Thank you very, very much, Mr. Jansen, for your inputs. And by the way, hopefully we don't ask unfair questions to you. We really value inputs, and it is really aimed at saying, if we can't deal with this problem via tariffs, what are the alternatives that are available to both to government as well as to Eskom itself? So we really appreciate your input. We thank you.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you for the opportunity.
Thank you. The next presentation is from Ms. Gillian van der Merwe. We will then, I'm not sure whether we should take a break now or we'll take a break after. Perhaps we'll take a 5-minute break after. If you can unshare your presentation, Mr. Jansen, to allow Ms. van der Merwe to be able to. Thank you, sir. Okay. There is still feedback. I'm not sure where it's coming from. Maybe it might be coming from yourself, madam. But anyway, so maybe can we start and say, before we actually start, as you know, we normally start with a process of swearing. We can still see your presentation, your laptop, Mr. Jansen. If we can unshare it.
Apologies, Chair. I will work on that.
All right. Now I can see. Yeah. All right. Thank you. If we can then maybe just start with the process, which is basically the process of swearing in. If I may ask you a question, Ms. van der Merwe, do you object to taking an oath or an affirmation?
No.
All right. In that particular case, can you then kindly raise your right hand and affirm the following? Do you solemnly declare that the evidence or the information that you're going to give to this panel is the truth and the whole truth as you know it?
I do.
In that particular case, just for the record, if you can just state your name, the entity you are representing today, and your designation therein, please.
I'm Gillian van der Merwe, and I'm from Municipal Accounts Disputes, and we represent a large number of customers, especially in the Northwest area, with any municipal issues they have, as well as Eskom-related issues. So today I'm representing the Northwest community.
Thank you, madam. With that, are you going to be making a PowerPoint presentation, or we're going to have a verbal input?
It's going to be a verbal input.
All right. No, thank you. With that, madam, you have 15 minutes. There's a bit of feedback. Maybe it may improve once I've actually closed mine. But there is a bit of feedback from I think it's from your side. But let's see that. Let's hope that it will improve. You've got 50 minutes, madam, to make your input.
Eskom is the only company worldwide that actually discourages customers to purchase its product. And the tariff increases that we've been having since 2008 has been a vicious circle. I've been to these public hearings year after year, and each year Eskom applies for double-digit increases. But my question is, does Eskom take into account the actual state of the economy and what is happening? Because not only the economy was struggling, COVID came and COVID hit a lot of businesses very hard. Especially in the Northwest, businesses have closed down, there's been business rescues, places like Clover, exited Lichtenburg. So I don't think Eskom has actually thought their tariff increases well, because you cannot continue, it's a vicious circle, having double-digit increases while the economy is suffering. We are supposed to create jobs, but we are sitting with a 40% unemployment figure, and at this trend, we will not be able to create jobs, because as Eskom is sending the signals out to sell less energy because it's becoming too expensive, number one. Secondly, too difficult to use because load shedding impacts the clients also very heavily. So it forces clients to look at other options like solar. And because this is happening in the industry, the other consumers that are left that don't have the other means have to pay the high prices for electricity. In my opinion, there are municipalities that owe Eskom billions of rands. And this has been going on year in and year out. Eskom has not recovered that money. Secondly, what about all the money that's gone for corruption? The Gupta's money that was stolen. It hasn't been put back into Eskom. People that are buying, it was in the news where they bought a roll of toilet paper for 30 rand instead of 3 rand. And the poor consumer is paying for it. My other concern is Eskom is sitting with fixed charges. The previous gentleman also mentioned that fixed charges and charges per cost per kilowatt hour. Why must the fixed charges keep on increasing? You're not getting anything for those fixed charges because you are paying an access charge per day. But if you look at the days that you're off in load shedding, you shouldn't be paying that money. So they should reduce the fixed charges and they can maybe get an increase on the cent per kilowatt hour to generate electricity. But somewhere along the line, Eskom should meet the client halfway. In my opinion, if Eskom should get an increase, it should be anything between 5 and 8%, but definitely not 20%. Thank you.
That was quick now. No, but thank you. You've given us some time back. Mr. Mkhize, any questions from yourself now, sir?
I don't necessarily have a question, Chairperson. I appreciate the presentation from Van der Merwe because it does talk to the issue of affordability, which I think in the socio-economic analysis should delve deeper there. But maybe if there's any basis other than the CPI, talk of CPI, maybe any basis on choosing 5 to 8%?
Okay, thanks, Mr. Mkhize. Can I add one question from my side as well? There was a plea yesterday, Madam, from the CFO that said, can we not look at affordability? I'm hoping that I'm going to rephrase his plea correctly. But really, what we're saying is that if the costs paid by Eskom are legitimate and prudent, can we not impose the burden of affordability to try to negate those costs? That is, can we not make a decision on the validity of the application by Eskom based on affordability? Do you believe that that is a fair view? I guess the question that I ask is that we have a methodology that we as NESA are meant to implement. Now, to what extent do we depart from the methodology because, or how would we depart from a methodology because, say, for instance, whatever that's going to come out might not be affordable? What is your suggestion?
My suggestion is actually to look at the whole electricity supply industry differently, because at this stage, Eskom is selling less and less electricity. So to go and increase the cost more because you're selling less doesn't make sense, because it becomes so unaffordable that businesses either close or choose other alternatives. So somewhere along the line, they need to look at costs that are actual costs and that are prudent costs, not costs that have been overinflated. And on that, then maybe the regulator can make a decision to say, this is what things should cost. But Eskom is paying too much for X. That's used the example of the toilet paper that they were supposed to pay 3 Rand for, but they paid 30 Rand or wrong. Why must the customer bear the cost for things? It shouldn't cost that much. So somewhere along the line, somebody needs to do a proper analysis, and people need to be honest, because I don't think Eskom is completely honest with what's happening inside financially.
We thank you, man, for your input. Mr. Mkiza, you still don't have any further follow-ups or any comments? I assume not?
Not at all, thank you.
All right, no, thank you, Mr. Mkiza. We'd like to thank you, Ms. van der Merwe. We will, as you can see, we are in an enviable position that says you've got to balance the interest of the consumers versus the interest of the supplier, because, as they say, the most expensive electricity is electricity that is not available. That has to be the most expensive electricity. So we need to make sure at one end that the entity called Eskom is sustainable, but on the other, in its sustainability, we have to make sure that the consumers of the electricity can afford the electricity. We'd like to thank you for your input now.
Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, ma'am. Okay, with that, colleagues, we're going to have 2 more presentations from Mr. Jean Kaiser and Mr. David Morris. Can I just request that we take a 5-minute comfort break, and then we can start again with yourself immediately after that. So if you need to set up, please do set up. If you have a presentation to put up. So according to my clock, the time is 15:35 at the moment. Can we start again at 15:40 with your presentation, sir? Thank you. Let's just take a comfort break.
Yeah, I don't want none of that. So, that's what it's Anna. I'm gonna take that head out. I have a room empty. I'll take that head out, log Kaufel, and try to assemble all this.
Double, just mute. Guys, switch off your mics. Double. Please switch off your mics.
It's Double.
I'd like to welcome everybody back. I'm not sure, I did see Mr. Jean Kaiser. Thank you, Mr. Kaiser, noted. By the way, you got to start by actually just correcting me in terms of how I say your name. But anyway, before you do, I guess let's start with the official parts. That says, do you object to taking an oath or an affirmation?
No.
Okay, in that particular case, kindly raise your right hand and affirm the following. Do you solemnly declare that the information or the evidence you're going to give to this panel is the truth and the whole truth as you know it?
Yes, I do.
Okay, now for the record, if you can just state your name, the entity you are representing today, and your designation, please.
I'm John Kaiser, and I represent Olifants Homeowners Association, Magalies Landowners Forum, and Boerevereniging, and a lot of other farmers in the Rustenburg area.
All right, no, thank you. Sorry, I've got a hand here from ICT. Yes, Gerald, do you want to assist perhaps? Oh, okay, no, thank you. All right.
Okay. I'll do it now. Is that better now?
Much better. Thank you, Gerard. Thank you. I was wondering why the feedback. I wasn't sure, but anyway, thank you very, very much, Mr. Kaiser. You have your you have 50 minutes. I'm not sure whether you're making a verbal or are you making a PowerPoint input.
No, I'm going to make a verbal one, and it's also going to be short and sweet and quick, over and done.
All right. Okay. Thank you. Then but you do have your 50 minutes there, and your 50 minutes start. Thanks.
Thank you very much. Our result where I am from, and yeah, everybody in this area is against the 20.5% increase, with a ripple effect of COVID-19 still going on. Some people are still unemployed in the Rustenburg area. Some are still on 50% salaries. And for the lucky ones that did get an increase raise last year, got an average of 3.5 to 3.7% increase for 2021. Eskom increase in the last 14 years has increased by 753%. Inflation only went up by 153%. How will South Africans afford 20.5%? Eskom is forcing us to look at other alternatives, and that's going to decrease Eskom's income and grow the debtors book even more. Rustenburg is suffering job losses in the mining area, and with the increase, you're just going to make it worse. With a 20.5% increase, what is going to do with the rest of the economy, we all know it's going to get worse. The area I'm representing are mostly farmers in the area and tourism, both sectors that got a hard hit in the COVID-19 time. And my opinion, and quite a lot of the other opinions, is this increase is going to be the last nail in the coffin for some residents and businesses in the area. That's going to make it even a bigger job loss. Please rethink it, and by starting to reconstruction Eskom and getting the rotten, corrupt officials out and make the difference in the country needs to show the world we are a country to invest in. And by starting by a state-owned entity like Eskom will definitely make the difference for all to enjoy it. That's it. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Short and sweet as you've indicated. Thank you for your input. Mr. Mkiza, any comments, questions, sir?
Thanks for a very brief, to the point presentation, John Kaiser. From my side, as you represent the agricultural community, I think by and large the same question will apply in terms of the kind of increase that will kill the chemist we break the camel's back to say what percentages would really kill your sector. And then the other issue is when it comes to alternatives. Just to get an indication again, like the same question I posed earlier on, in terms of scope for increase in sales in your sector, or finding alternatives which is going to plunge the sales further, just to reflect on that. But otherwise, I appreciate your presentation. It was clear as to what message you're putting across. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Mkhize. I think for myself, this is the most difficult part, I think, of being a civil servant, because I mean, the points you're raising are very valid, and I'm really hoping that Eskom is listening. But I guess they would also sit on the other side and say, yeah, we hear you, but we've got these real costs that we have to put through, and we don't have much of an option of absorbing it, or unless somebody else needs to pick up this cost. So I don't even know what to say, Kesna, because I think the difficulty is that, and maybe it may come across as NESA, it may not be listening to some of the inputs that are coming and the pleas that are coming from people like yourselves. But the question that remains is, and maybe it's not really your question, it's not a question, it's not a fair question to pose to yourselves, but it's just a question, I guess, that is, I'm really hoping that all the people that need to hear this are actually listening to your pleas, colleagues. That says, what is it when NESA is bound by laws, is bound by its methodologies, is bound by all of the things that the pricing, electricity pricing policies and whatever, and all of the things that have been indicated earlier by Eskom. What is it that NESA can do? I mean, I don't know. I'm posing the question to you, but there's been an application, a valid application made by Eskom using a particular methodology. Now, what is it that NESA can do, in your opinion, just as guidance? Thanks.
Okay, getting back to Mr. Mkhize's answer, I agree with the previous speaker. A 5 to 8% is I think a real good increase. If we look at the inflation rate of just over 7%, then we can look at that maybe. That will be a good indication of increases we look at. I know most people say we must say no increase, but I know there's a lot of increases that happen, like one of the previous speakers said, the fuel with 34%. And yeah, getting back to the question on what NASA can do, I'm glad I'm not sitting in your shoes, to be honest. I know it's a difficult one, and I know you guys must be the buffer in between both parties, the public and Eskom, and yeah, I really can't give you an answer on that one. I'll have to sit and think about it and get back to you on that question. But yeah, increases, I think, is that. And just getting back to the fuel increase was 34%. Let's say Eskom gets it right to put up a 20.5% increase on the electricity. What happens is everybody takes that as a base rate and they put their 10%, for example, on, and eventually you get to everything will be an increase of 40%. That's what I think.
Oh, okay. No, thank you. As we say, sometimes some of the input can be depressing without any, I don't know. I mean, we're supposed to see a rainbow at the end of every rain, but I'm not sure whether that rainbow is visible to most people in this industry. Maybe, hopefully, it will be. All right, but I'd like to thank you, sir, for your input.
Thank you very much. I appreciate it.
And much appreciated. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. All right, we're coming to our second last speaker, where the last speaker again being, we're going to be asking Eskom to respond where it seems that where it feels that it needs to respond. Can we now then move to Mr. David Morris? Mr. David Morris, if you can come on, sir, that you are the next speaker. If we can see you. I saw you signing in earlier.
Hi, do you see me?
Yes, I can see your mic flickering, but I still don't see you yet. Looks promising. Not yet. Looks promising, and then it disappears.
That's strange.
All right, now we can see. Yes.
Great.
All right.
Okay.
Thank you. As you know, let's just get the legalities out of the way. Did you object to taking an oath or an affirmation?
I do not.
In that particular case, can you kindly raise your right hand and affirm the following? Do you solemnly declare that the evidence or the information you're going to give to this panel is the truth and the whole truth as you know it?
I do so declare.
For the record, please state your name, your company, and your designation therein, please.
Okay, I'm Dr. David Morris. I'm representing this afternoon the Diocese of Kimberley and Kuruman, Anglican Church of Southern Africa, and I am a lay canon and a member of the Senate.
Thank you. I assume that you're going to be making a verbal input.
I actually have a PowerPoint.
A PowerPoint presentation, that is fine. And I assume that you've been given authority to share it?
Yes.
All right, if you can kindly flight it, and then I'll indicate if we can see it. Still not coming through.
Do you see it?
Now it's coming. Yep, we can see it. You can just put it on a presentation mode. Thanks.
Sure.
Thank you. You have 15 minutes for your presentation, and your 15 minutes starts now. Thank you.
Great, thank you. It probably won't be as long as that. Yeah, so as I mentioned, representing Kimberley and Kuruman Diocese, the environmental desk. I'd just like to give some background to what constituency I represent. Geographically, the diocese is quite large. It encompasses a number of urban areas, the city of Kimberley, and towns Uppington, Kuruman, Vryburg, Mahikeng, De Aar, Britstown, Postmasburg, and several others in between, as well as the rural hinterlands of each of these urban town and township contexts. And also the diocese straddles the Northern Cape and the Northwest provinces. Secondly, in terms of context of the constituency or constituencies, they comprise the Anglican parishes of the diocese, people who are Tswana, Xhosa, Afrikaans and English speaking, spread across this space and varying from a minority of relatively well-off urban congregations to those who are urban and rural poor in townships and villages. And from this, it would be clear that for the people I represent, energy access or affordability would be measured on a scale from relatively accessible and affordable to less accessible or inaccessible and increasingly unaffordable. A high proportion of the people and communities we represent are rural, village and township based with high levels of unemployment. And of course, the experience of the last 2 years has knocked our populations very, very badly in the Northern Cape with COVID-19 on top of the general economic situation. We're the largest province or provinces with certainly the Northern Cape has the lowest population in the country. So in terms of all the indices used for apportioning funding for various programs by government, we tend to get the smallest slice of the cake. and that has knock-on in terms of the economic position of our towns in particular. We'd like to acknowledge that Eskom faces challenges, including its inherited debt, some apparently due to mismanagement over many years, some because of failure by users, particularly local authorities, to cover the costs of energy used, and that's clearly a major problem. From the several issues identified by SAFC, which is the organization, the Faith Community Environmental Institute, which has invited us to be part of this process, we wish to highlight, from our perspective, several of the issues which they have submitted in a detailed submission to your organization. And the first is that expensive electricity is exclusive electricity, and this makes reference, in our view, to fundamental moral and ethical considerations which come from the faith community side of things, insofar as reducing access and affordability of electricity contradicts the national ideology and goals of the government and the people to reduce discrimination and barriers to opportunity. Key to this point is the capacity for local authorities to provide free basic electricity in addressing a basic human right. This capacity is increasingly eroded. We are concerned there's a figure of 27% of children in South Africa under the age of 5 are reportedly severely malnourished, and this undermines physical health and cognitive development and has knock-on impacts in terms of education and rural and urban economies in the longer term. Impact is reflected and exacerbated by parents' spending priorities. For instance, usually parents would spend on electricity before food, because electricity is something one cannot do without. We're in an increasingly digital world, banking, education, online lectures, all of that sort of thing, but especially services such as banking, where in places like the Northern Cape, there are many towns where certain of the banks have announced that they're closing or have closed branches because they're not economic, and people can access their accounts digitally, requiring electricity. And this makes electricity accessibility and affordability a sine qua non for all citizens. One can't even pay, in many places, one cannot pay taxes without having electricity. It needs to be acknowledged that high electricity tariffs and the current inadequacy of the free basic energy system is impacting health and well-being of low-income households. We endorse SAFC's call on NERSA to look into exploring a revised system to provide an adequate basic electricity subsidy to low-income households. We also want to endorse further their call for NERSA to use its authority to proactively support and prioritize renewable energy. We are concerned that the Northern Cape's transmission capacity is already constrained and cannot take on additional renewable energy generation projects. There's a map here that was reported on in August last year, which shows that the Northern Cape and a big slice of Northwest Province have constrained transmission capacity. And so beyond the existing renewable energy projects in our area, no additional generation projects seem to be possible in terms of that report. Coupled with this, we're concerned about the energy export and servicing the carbon offsetting market of other countries, possibly compromising local access. So in other words, the sale of our electricity and other energy sources. And I'd also like to make the further point that this applies both at the national, international level and in the local context. For instance, in the vicinity where these renewable energy projects are being created, where these generation sites are positioned in rural areas in the Northern Cape, they then feed the national grid with only limited benefit to local people. So access by local communities to this electricity that's being generated on their doorstep is virtually non-existent. So I think that's an important issue to be looking into. And so we endorse the SAFC call on NERSA and DMRE to review priorities and refocus on renewable energy in order to provide affordable new electricity generation and to enhance the capacity of the grid to accommodate it before embarking on other ventures that may compromise Eskom's ability to maintain existing infrastructure. It's also crucial to address electricity provision in a broader systemic way, particularly with regard to Eskom's debt burden and payments to Eskom by defaulting local authorities. In the news, I think it was just yesterday or the day before, was the story of Renosterbach, a local municipality in the northeastern Karoo area, where their bank accounts were attached in order to claim back money owed to Eskom, something like 106 million rands, I think it was, and as a result of that, the municipal workers had gone unpaid since December. And so there are the knock-on impacts with multiple causes, it has to be stated. So it's not exclusively Eskom's fault, but the collapse of local authorities' capacity requires a systemic approach, which is not likely to be helped by a 20.5% tariff increase for electricity. And it's not going to be helped by attaching bank accounts either. And so we endorse SAFC's submission that puts it that out of the box funding solutions need to be found. And our particular faith community, the Diocese of Kimberley and Kuruman, joins SAFC in calling on NERSA to advocate for systemic processes towards this. So I think what's required here is interaction between Eskom, DMRE, and all other relevant departments of state that can try to bring some kind of solution to this issue of local authorities not paying and not being able to pay for the electricity, the energy needs that they have. And that about wraps it up. I just, in closing, the diocese thanks SAFC for the invitation to make the submission, and particularly NERSA for the opportunity to comment. And we'd be very happy to have any questions forwarded to us by email. Thank you very much.
Thank you very, very much, Reverend, for your input, well-structured presentation, and very much on time. You gave us 5 minutes back, so very well appreciated. Mr. Mkiza, any questions from you?
Yeah, thanks, Chairperson. Thanks, Reverend. I'm actually encouraged by the participation of faith communities in these hearings, just taking the element of caring for the communities even further. Just two things really, and I hope Eskom is, as they are listening, in terms of what they require for the increase, as to what sort of contributions will they then make to the South African economy in the face of the challenges that are raised, particularly on the issues of affordability, because we are also a very diverse and unequal society, making things a bit complicated, just in whatever they do, just to also spare thought in terms of what their contribution is in the face of the challenges, having also had a challenge, even further difficulties with COVID-19, as well as the downgrading. With regard to the presentation at hand, I would also like to know, you talk of local communities benefiting. Just for you to reflect on this with regard to equitable treatment, because we're still sitting currently with the Mpumalanga supplying generating the bulk of the electricity from coal-fired power stations. How then is it fair then to talk of local communities as if that is what is the current dispensation with Mpumalanga. Sometimes you sit at Governing Bay municipality and you can see two power stations at the same time, but you're sitting there with no lights on. And then the issue of non-payment, it may not be something that you can respond to now in terms of the out-of-the-box funding mechanisms. I think it would be appreciated if you can also send some written comments, if any, around some of the out-of-the-box funding mechanism that you might suggest. I rest my case there. Thanks, Chairperson.
Thank you, Mr. Mkhize. Mr. Morris, if you can go back one slide, I think it's slide 10, you talk about the systematic changes. I think that's how you phrased it. Systematic processes, yes. We are advocating for systematic processes. Can you maybe, if you care to elaborate on that a bit, in terms of your views, how could that change? You know, it's you know, you might maybe just declare where I'll be coming from. You know, I'm trained as a metallurgical engineer, so I grew up processing metals. And that's the business I understand. That's the business I grew up in. Now, and I understand the role of electricity in that, especially in the production of metals from ore bodies. Now, people then say, deal away with this and do something different. But in my mind, I say, but I'm born into an environment where, you know, I need steel for anything that I do. I need aluminium. There's no other metallurgical process that we can produce aluminium from alumina other than putting electricity into it. And if it's not done here, it's going to be shipped and done somewhere else. That goes for chrome and other metals. Now, it's a system that I live in. Now, can I simply just change one input without changing the system? So I guess it's actually in that space that I'm asking the question. And I'm then asking maybe, in your view, when we're talking about this systematic processes, a systematic change, what are you advocating for? Maybe if you can expand a little bit. Thanks.
Okay, so I think firstly, it's not so much systematic. I think systematic is needed, but systemic was the word that I was using. And I think this is clearly one of the biggest challenges that we face as a country. We see almost every aspect of local governance is challenged. Yesterday I was driving through, in fact, part of Northwest Province, and in some of those towns, the roads are more pothole than anything else. Yeah, so it's just this the kind of, and I think it's something to do with the funding system. It's also to do with local expertise, and this is why I'm saying that a systemic addressing of this matter is required, which brings in many different heads and minds and sources of expertise to try to solve the problems of what is happening at local government level. And if one can sort out those issues and one can get service delivery happening at that level, and you get your income stream coming into the municipality and from municipality to pay Eskom and whatever else needs to be paid, we're going to be a long way towards solving many of the biggest issues that we face as South Africans. I don't think there are any easy answers, but I think one way to start is to bring together these different departments of government, different kinds of expertise, different insights, because I don't think Eskom itself, not the freezing of accounts, none of those individual actions is going to actually solve the problem. We need a combined effort, and I think it needs intervention from high up in government to actually get something going along these lines. I hope that helps.
And I guess here they are. I'm hoping that I'm audible. I'm struggling with my. Okay, thank you. I'm audible. I'm struggling with my mic. It's indicating as if it's off. It's off here, but now it's on. I guess as Reverend, you are indicating, it's going to be all hands on deck. It's easy to it's actually easy to blame one player, who perhaps is in the forefront and is the one that has got his head his or her head stuck up, and everybody's going for it. When in fact the problem is more systemic rather than just that particular. So that's just the tip of the iceberg. So for me, I think the request is always going to be from everybody, and faith communities included, is that we look at this as a systemic problem which requires a systemic solution. It can't be a once-off solution, and NESA on its own cannot be able to solve this problem, but can contribute, of course. So can everybody else. But we really thank you for your inputs. And if you can maybe just share that presentation and your further, I assume that you've made formal written comments to NERSA, but if you haven't, we really invite you that you actually submit your written comments again to NERSA. We'll be able to see what we can do in terms as we finalize this process. But we thank you.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you so very much. All right, we've come to the end of today's session. You can unshare for us. Thank you. We are now going to we will afford again Eskom an opportunity, 15 minutes as we've agreed previously. We would like to get Eskom yeah. Okay. We'd like to get Eskom to actually come on board and maybe capture whatever that they want to capture and respond to things that they feel they want to respond to off the cuff. I guess, or even just to indicate perhaps how they will deal with tomorrow. Maybe just to indicate what issues that they will deal with tomorrow. So they've got the 15 minutes. Mr. Talimaje, I still hope you are still on the call.
Yes, sir.
You are, okay. So I think I've been requested to pose a very, as you speak, to maybe you could actually answer this question. You would want Eskom to help in your situation, but what are you offering South Africa given the troubles that the country is going through? If you can appreciate details, they don't even if it's not, you're actually not responding today. So if you can just kindly indicate. So that's just I think an overall question that simply says, I guess we're giving in one hand, you're taking on the other. What is it that you would want to share with the public? It doesn't have to be today. But over to you. You have your 15 minutes.
Yeah. No, thank you, Chair. Maybe we'll start with your last question. And is that what is Eskom providing? Eskom is trying its best to ensure that it can provide a continuous supply of electricity. That is the service that Eskom is supplying, and that is what we are giving for what the price increases that we are asking for. And again, as we have always mentioned, that we are still not in a situation where we are recovering the full cost of that electricity. So to answer that question, we provide electricity, or we try our best to provide electricity within the requirements that we can meet. Coming back to we will be very brief. We've just picked on certain points that we would like to respond to now. The first one was that the first speaker, I think after us, did talk about our audit report that has been published, and we're aware of that and we acknowledge that, and that is part of our normal process where we have put in plans to be able to address all of those aspects that were uncovered in the audit report. And again, just to clarify that is a backward-looking situation, and what we are looking here is at a forward-looking situation. The other point that also came about, which we have addressed, but we'll just summarize again, is as far as the fraud and corruption issues are concerned, and we are equally concerned, and we are addressing that again, but many of the things are outside or dealt with in outside processes, as we're aware, the Zondo Commission, the SIU investigations, etc., and we await those processes. And I think the whole country is aware that these processes take longer than anybody wishes them to be. And we have in our previous presentation shown that thus far we have recovered in the region of about 2.5 billion rands from certain organizations that we've managed to recover from after the investigations, etc., has happened. So we do hope that that would be an ongoing process, and any time that any of that monies are recovered, we do include it in our RCA applications. The other point that was made, and I think we did speak to this, and Mr. Mkhize did ask a few questions about it, is that what Eskom applies for is efficient costs. And we do provide the facts and evidence of how these costs are determined to be efficient. And again, it would be NERSA that would clarify that. And, as mentioned in a previous session also, is that we have found, for example, in the 2019 RCA, that NERSA has found all our employee benefits costs to be efficient. So what was not approved in the revenue determination was subsequently approved either in the supplementary application or in the regulatory clearing account. So whatever Eskom's actual employee benefits costs were, NERSA has fully approved that. Similarly, in the last MYPD4 period for the 2 years, NERSA has fully, for the 1 year that we're aware of, NERSA has fully approved all of the coal costs that Eskom has applied for, either in the a revenue application and then in the RCA. So that shows that there is a meeting of the minds as far as what are the prudent levels of certain of our costs, and we are getting there as far as decisions are concerned as well. Again, and we do sympathize with the points that has always been made in all of the public hearings is the affordability aspects. And again, we point out at our session yesterday, we did provide proposals that could be considered by NERSA as it makes its determination, especially in the EarthStar process. And we also acknowledge that this is something that maybe is beyond NERSA and it's a policy matter. And again, because NERSA and we ourselves as Eskom have raised that in government circles whenever we have the opportunity to, because we do see that in an important issue. The affordability for poor residential customers, as far as, and also for specific industrial customers that will be able to provide jobs and be able to contribute to the GDP. And the last point that we just wanted to make is that, we do hear from some of the input that has been provided that many of the challenges that many of the stakeholders are dealing with are linked to the municipal supply. And so I think, and I know Mr. Mkhize did suggest that there are people in NERSA that look at these kinds of issues. And I think that also needs to be distinguished, because we're not absolutely sure that all of those issues are actually Eskom's issues. And I think it is important maybe for NERSA to undertake maybe a municipal workshop, a roadshow, as it does for Eskom, as well as it determines its price increases when it develops the benchmarks and etc. So that would be an opportunity for consumers that get the electricity, who are substantial, by the way, from municipalities, also to be able to air their issues, specifically looking at the municipal supply situation as well. I thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much, Madam. And I guess we didn't actually today, we didn't have to bring in Dr. Minar, but thank you for your inputs. As we indicate that tomorrow is going to be the last day of the series, and we're looking forward to the last day. And I'm hoping that Eskom will do as it has done pretty well this week to then summarize all the inputs and also maybe just give direction in terms of, based on everything that it has listened to say at the end of the day, what does it then suggest? How does it suggest that NERSA should handle this current revenue application? But I think it would be useful to then link it to the final ERSA, because I've been listening to people talking about a 20.5% increase in tariff, but that is making reference to the final ERSA process. But it would be useful if we could actually, in the input that's going to come from Eskom tomorrow, to see how we actually bring the two processes together. Yes, the focus is in terms of the revenue, in terms of the allowed revenue, but clearly for the consumers, it's not, they don't see these differences that we all see. All they will be looking at is what would be the ultimate increase that will hit their pocket on the 1st of April. And we're looking forward to a proper guidance from Eskom as it concludes its inputs, as in terms of how it, what is the final number, and how it sees that final number, that will then, at the end of the day, be the ERSA number. So although, yes, we know this is only about the baseline revenue, but we need to be able to deal with this in a comprehensive thing tomorrow. So, yeah, so I think it's been a longish day, still better than the first day, but tomorrow might be slightly longer. Looking forward to the final day of these public hearings. That's going to be tomorrow, and we're going to be running parallel from the Gallagher Estate and also on a platform like this one. So it's going to be a dual process. With that, I'd like to bring this public hearing today to a close and actually indicate that the meeting is now adjourned. It stands adjourned. Thank you. Until tomorrow.
Thank you, Chairperson. Thanks to all the attendees. Cheers.
Thank you.